This is NHTV2, North Haven Government Television, a service of North Haven Community Television. The following program is brought to you through the support of the Town of North Haven.
All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the regular meeting of the North Haven Board of Finance from March 13th, 2025. We do have a lot of guests here this evening, so it's nice to see our residents are here. We have two major items on the agenda this evening. It's our normal agenda with the reports of the revenue expenditures, and that'll be followed by finalization of the 25-26 budget. And just as a reminder, our goal and role here this evening is to finalize the expenditure side of both the town and Board of Ed budgets. Having said that, let's just go into our agenda, please. Starting with the minutes of last month's meeting. I'll take a motion.
I make a motion to accept.
Second?
Second.
Any comments?
Your name is misspelled in one section. I didn't know how.
I take no offense.
Okay.
I'll take a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? All right, thank you. Under old business, I'll just, we did have one or two questions that came from one of our board members. Okay, so let me just, this came through Ingrid, but it came from the Board of Ed. So there was a question, in the current fiscal year 2024-25, how much of the $950,000 Board of Ed budget reduction has had to be covered by withdrawals from the medical and dental reserve account? And I'll just read it verbatim. As of claims paid through the end of February and the March district payment to the reserve account, the reserve account has seen a year-to-date activity of negative $590,955. The second question was, given the 9 district resignations consented by the Board of Ed since August of this year, 5 teachers, 1 special ed, 1 paraeducator, and 2 admin assistants, are there any vacancy savings, salary, and benefits that impact the proposed 25-26 Board of Ed budget? And again, I'll just read it verbatim. In comparing the resignations against those who are hired to fill these positions with the 2025 salary scales, the district will not see any realized savings in either their salaries or the benefits that these individuals who replace these positions elected to take. There was one other question, and I might need Ingrid's help here. The question, it's actually on the proposed budget, but I'll give it now anyways. Under police, the line item for patrolman was set to increase from $3,700,640 to $4,269,408. That increase was $568,768. There was a question of why that was so large in the proposed budget. Ingrid, I think my recollection was, 1, there are 2 additional patrolmen in the current budget as it stands at this exact moment. Plus, I think if the members may remember last year, we gave the police department 2 new hires as of January 1, which basically means there's another full year expense in the budget.
We were also, I recall we had we were under contract negotiations, so
Yes.
the budgeted amount,
Okay.
partially, it was there, and the rest of it was in a contract obligation.
Merit and steps, yeah.
And
Okay.
they did have a new contract, so they had increases there.
Right.
So again, I was the one that asked this question. If you take last year's line item for this, for the patrolmen, and you simply increase it by 2.5%, which is what is done with all of the other lines in the police department, that total is about $92,000. So it sounds like the incremental cost of 2 police officers for a half year and 2 police officers for a full year is about $480,000.
The contract had
Yeah, the
new
contract-
stipends.
Yeah, that's a big part.
And also, the amount budgeted there was previous to the contract.
So
they
I
were
think it's
current
worth
wages.
reminding that when we don't have a settled contract, we accrue in a different line item.
Right.
And when the contract settles, we move it over to the exact line item and
Right,
reduce.
which
Is it
this
accrued
year-
benefits? What's the other? Not accrued benefits.
Contract obligations.
Contract obligations, right.
Isn't it paid out of contractual obligations under the personnel line for the bump up in the?
No, it's
No.
paid out of the contract obligations line.
Yes, paid out of the contract obligations line,
Right, but this
not-
year is the new contract.
What she's saying is, the contract wasn't settled last year. And so what we historically have done has, we've accrued an estimate of what the increase will be, but it's accrued under contract obligations in another line within our budget.
Correct.
Once the contract settles, they move the full increase into the police department payroll line, if you will. Okay, and
Right.
that's what part of the reason you're seeing the big jump, then they reduce the contract obligation line.
And can I make a comment too?
Please.
In addition to all that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to give you some inside baseball here. We were losing police officers to other towns and cities because the pay scale wasn't competitive enough. So Rich Monaco and I took the lead, and we did the union contract negotiation together with the police officers. So this topic here, where we're seeing a little bit more money, it's because we had to stop the tide. We had to stop the tide from going where officers were going to adjacent towns because the pay was better and the benefits were better. And I think everyone would agree here that public safety is critically important, whether it's police and fire.
Yes.
All right, any further comments on those questions before we move into our regular reports? All right, let's move into the revenue for the town. I'll just make a couple questions. They're not inconsistent with what we've seen so far in this fiscal year, but we've got some lines that are running nicely ahead. We have some that are running, unfortunately, well behind. So one of the rock stars has been our interest on short-term investments, which is considerably ahead for the year. On the other hand, we are below on town clerk fees, building fees, and fire fees. We are ahead on interest and liens and supplemental auto. And Ingrid, I believe we're running a little behind on the taxes, but you might be better than me to comment on that. On the
We are
current-
running a little bit behind on taxes.
Okay. Questions, comments for on the revenue side, please?
Yeah, I just had one question regarding the taxes, which it seems that we're running at about 98%. We have this line item, personal property audit taxes, in which it's budgeted at about $150,000. And it seems as though last year, we brought in 0 for that. Thus far, this year, we've brought in 0. Is there some historical reason why we continue to budget for this particular line item?
Yeah,
It is actually, oh, go ahead.
Yes, not a good one, and it's not in next year's budget. But historically, when Ed was here, for whatever reason, what used to happen was he had this number in here, but then at some point, I think we found out that to the extent that he was collecting audit taxes, and I'm not even sure if we're doing the audits anymore, but he was moving into one of the other lines, so.
Yeah, they're being collected out of a different line.
Yeah, so, truth be told, Nancy, I mean, we probably should have taken this out last year, but I think we at least got it right this year.
Yes.
I believe it's not in the current budget for 2026.
Okay, great. And the telephone access line, again, it's currently running at 0. Is that something we only get towards the
It's
second
one
half of the year?
payment at the
One
end of the
payment at the
year.
end, and likewise with Mashantucket Pequot, or is that the total amount that we're going to get?
No, we will get another payment.
We will get another payment, yeah. Okay.
We're expected to fully receive that $2.3 million there.
We continue to do extremely well with interest in short-term investments, which is running at about 150% of what we budgeted, as well as town miscellaneous receipts. And I think we should keep that in mind for the second half of this meeting, in which we're talking about various sources of revenue and some reasonable projections for those revenue line items. By contrast, our to date this year, again, we don't know what the next few months hold, but Building fees, fire fees, and paramedic services, the revenues from those three line items are in the 30% range, and so that's a little on the low side. So our town revenue general is doing quite well. However, our other specific town revenue departments, some of them are a little bit lacking. And of course, the state of Connecticut funds, as Ingrid just mentioned, will come in throughout the rest of the year.
Right,
I would add that the miscellaneous receipts, they're mainly due to blight fees, blight settlements, so that will not happen in any other years.
Thank you, Ingrid. All right, why don't we move on to the expenditures? Let's just go right to questions on those, if we would.
On page 3, under building inspection permit, once again, the overtime line continues to balloon, and it's now at over 400%. And so for next year, this particular line item is only budgeted at about $6,200, and we've already spent $25,000 this year. Now, we do have a consultant, or consultants, plural, within this department, but again, they're only at about 50%. So I don't know if there's some way to reconcile
Well,
those two
this year,
things.
a consultant resigned, so
Okay.
there's OT work, overtime to cover his work. Perhaps they were thinking that next year we'll have that consultant back, we'll hire somebody.
So we have multiple consultants, 2,
Yes, we have.
or at least
multiple.
budgeted?
Yeah, we have
At
multiple.
least budgeted, okay. On the next page, on page 4, for the library, it appears as though there was a big monthly expense for building maintenance and repair. Do we have any insights about that? And they're also at about 85% for that line item, so it's a little concerning.
Yes,
It's a big encumbrance, Ingrid, there must be something going on over there.
Isn't that something with the roof?
yeah, we had an excess cost for the roof of $150,000. That was it was $150,000, but the excess cost was $16,000. We had to rebuild a heating pump for $5,000, and there was other repairs. So we did have to do some
That was
major
six-
repairs at the library.
Exactly. That was $16,000 over the $150,000
Right.
bond that we had, so, and we had to do it, so that's why that's higher. $16,000 cost more than we had anticipated.
Right.
On page 5, this isn't really a question about the line item per se. Under Treasurer Finance, we have an annual report, printing and distribution. Again, that line item is already over budget, but it just reminded me, does this cover the 2 CAFR reports or just one?
No, this is not related to that. This is actually our town calendars.
Oh, when I saw annual report, I assumed
Right, it was
an
just
annual
named
report.
like that forever. I can change.
Gotcha, okay, so it's a calendar, got it.
Yes.
Thank you.
It's $733 over, ladies and gentlemen.
I have a question. Page 7, the maintenance and repairs, which from town buildings, and I see there's an encumbrance of 10,000, so you know what that's for?
What page?
7. Central facilities, it's the maintenance and repairs. There's an encumbrance there, 10,610.
I'll have to look into that.
Okay.
Yeah. It's usually, if I didn't look into, it's usually a lot of the small items.
Yeah,
repairs for
sometimes it's a
different
lot, and
buildings.
some, yeah, that's the question, is it a little
Yeah, it's
things, or is it
probably,
one big issue somewhere?
I will say, I looked at the report, and I generally especially since being in there, I've been checking for the commodity-type items, heat, electricity, gas, oil, fuel. And with the exception of one department, I think every single department I saw was either sort of at their pro rata number or even slightly below. And sort of consistent with what we've seen for the year, although the report shows, one second, shows 72% expended, which it should be more like 67. Once you back out the encumbrances and some of the other bigger items like the bond payments and some other payments that are front-loaded, I think we're on track.
Can I make a comment then?
Please.
So to sum this part up, we know we're going to fall under our budget for expenditures. We're not going to hit the budget. We're going to fall under it. Rich Monaco and I would put a message out to the department heads to curb the spending between now and the end of the year. Fiscal year ends June 30th. Our dilemma is the revenue, like we just spoke about. The revenue numbers aren't coming in. On the building permit fees, you know, everybody here knows that I run the economic development here. I've got 3 or 4 major projects that are tied up. They can't get going so that we could collect fees for the construction because there's state traffic studies that have to be done. These projects are on state roads. So that sort of delays the process. Will there be more building permit fees? Yes, there will. Do I think we're going to make the number? No. We have overages, as was discussed here a few moments ago, but we've got to somehow create a balanced budget, which might be the under expenditures, the savings there, hopefully to offset the revenue loss, to balance it out. So we're on a mission now to try to drive as much revenue as possible, move these projects forward. I'm working with the state to try to fast track some of these traffic studies, and what we can control is the expenditure side, and that's what we're doing.
Thank you, Mike.
Mr. Chair.
Please go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, a couple very small items on page 6. Under personnel policy, the physical exams, is that for new hires or something? Would that be covered by our insurance?
No,
No. Those are
we have an
exams.
outside, yes. It's an outside, because they are not hired yet.
Okay. All right, well, just below that, by the way, under labor negotiations, a $75,000 line item, and we've only spent $4,700. Is that because Mr. Frieda and Mr. Monaco have been just not letting the lawyers in the room?
Well, what we've done is, and I'm going to give Rich Monaco the credit for this, okay, because he solved a lot of these contracts. So what we decided to do, and the police contract is a good example, what we did was we flipped the model around, and we got the attorneys on board. We were going to do the negotiations, and then the attorneys write the contract. This way, that saved us money, and that's kind of what you're seeing there.
Yes, we also needed to review some of the contracts as well, and that's why we budget for the 75, but that's still happening, so that's why we don't see expenditures there.
You know, it's a nice thing to have, so, very good. On page 10 here, for the fire maintenance and repair, there's another $24,000 a month there in $160,000 line item. I just want to know, should we expect that line item to be utilized yet less because of the new deliveries of the new vehicles, the new trucks?
I would say so.
Yeah. Okay, because we're 95% expended on that line, and I think we have enough for oil changes the rest of the year. That's good. That's all for expenses.
We have an encumbrance there of $38,000,
Yeah.
so that might cover it.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, anyone else on the town side expenses?
So I would agree that from an expense standpoint, even if you backed out the $626,000 in encumbrances, we're still in totality at about 70.9%. And we're currently, this is through the end of February, so that's 8/12 of the year, should be about 67%. So I would agree with Mr. Frieda that I think tightening our belts and really being very cautious about expenditures for the remainder of the year is a very wise directive for all of our department heads, and hopefully the revenue sources will start to come in.
Well, I think it's the other way around, truthfully, and I think that's what Mike said, and I think it's a little bit better, Nancy. I didn't take it to the penny, but just as an example, you know, our bond and note payment for the year is $10.1 million. We've already spent 9.3, right? So there's 800 left. So I didn't try and adjust for that, but I mean there are some line items like that one which would bring that 70% down a little bit closer to 67.
Okay. And on page 12, and this involves my colleague, Mr. Hallahan, as well, I see the entries for insurance. Last year at this point, we were kind of in a tight spot in terms of the medical insurance.
What page was that?
Sorry, page 17.
Okay, because I thought you said 12.
Sorry, my mistake. Page 17. Medical insurance, I just wondered if we could get an update as to where we are this year, and have there been any meetings with Brown & Brown to kind of get an update from an actuarial standpoint?
Well, the Board of Ed is always speaking with Brown & Brown. On the town side, we have
Town
Blue
side.
Point, and we speak with Blue Point often. I don't think there's been any meetings, but what we're anticipating here, we're hoping for, is that the way it works, folks, is that there's a 13-month look back on insurance. The renewals are based on 13 months of history. We're trending down a little bit, which is good. We're hoping, Rich Monaco and I, that by the end of, let's say, May or June, or even as soon as April, every month that's less than a previous month, the higher month gets knocked off, and we're able to utilize the lower month on claims history. Claims history is the utilization rate that our employees are using the insurance benefits. So we're waiting until the end of March to see what that March number looks like, which we'll probably get in April. And we're hoping that we're going to come under that budgeted insurance number that's in this book that everybody here is looking at. So we're hopeful for that, and it's trending that way. Now on the board, that's on the town side. On the Board of Ed side, it's a little bit different because there's a higher claims history there. So Brown & Brown, Patrick, and Christian are on top of that. Rich Monaco and I are on top of it here. And we speak, Christian, Patrick, myself, and Rich, we meet regularly.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
All right, any final questions on that before we move over to the Board of Ed?
I just have one request. Again, this is for the finance office's consideration going forward. I know you received some input from our auditor about the reporting of capital, but the practice of simply transferring out to capital in one lump sum, it kind of handicaps this board because we don't really have a sense for what purchases are made at what time and for what cost.
I can bring you that report next.
That would be great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, let's go on to the Board of Ed. The one thing I will say on the Board of Ed, which was brought to my attention by Representative Yacarino and confirmed by Mike, is that we know from this year and of course from our workshops with the Board of Ed that the cost of special ed tends to be volatile and they're rising, and tends to be a key component in the increase in next year's budget. However, I believe the state is going to pass legislation which will go into effect this year, and last I heard from Dave, based on that, we are expecting about $192,000 which will go to the Board of Ed to help defray the current year's special education costs.
Yes, that's accurate.
We didn't get our nice little write-up that we usually get.
No, we did not.
That is because the Board of Ed meets tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
So-
So it's kind of hard to tell.
Right.
What line item will that 192 affect?
Well, the board, they don't have special ed in one single line in
Okay.
here. It's in a couple different lines, Bob, so I
Okay.
don't have a good answer for you there, but it's in different lines here.
Okay, that's fine.
So what I can say about the Board of Ed budget, at least through February, is their percentage used, including encumbrances, is at about 68.8%, so that's pretty much on target. If you were to back out that encumbrance, they'd be at about 60%. So I'm encouraged by that. Again, that encumbrance is about $5.7 million. So I just had one question, and that is regarding, on the second page of the budget, line item 510A, regular transportation. It appears as though there's kind of almost a one-to-one ratio of year-to-date spending, which is a little over $1 million, and the encumbrance, which is over $800,000. So I wasn't sure whether that is something that was anticipated, or there's some balloon payment at the end of the year. I'm not quite sure why that distribution over the year, now that we're so much further into the fiscal year, why that isn't.
You're talking about the 837, Nancy?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. It's, if you combine the two, the line item is 99.6% spent, but it seems as though it's about half and half between actually spent and an encumbrance, so.
I'm gonna take a guess here. I'm guessing they're flatlining this and just prorating it over the months. That's my guess. And that it may not even reflect the actual expenditures.
Right.
It's a contract, right?
Yes.
And that's
I
the
will
thing,
ask
it's a
Christian.
contract, so it should be
Right.
very predictable. Okay. And just one other thing, again, this is more just a format issue. I just wondered if we could have a similar type of format for the Munis report from the Board of Ed to the one that we get for the town, that follows the same kind of format in terms of not only the year-to-date, but also the monthly expenditure for a given line item, and in particular, for the grants, it's organized by line item as opposed to the source of the grant. So you really can't say, for the Perkins grant, this was received on such and such a date, and this is the expenditure from that source on the following line items. So it's a little tricky to read that way. And we have two reports for state grants and 2 reports for federal grants. So it would be really helpful to be able to just see the same format of the grant source, the budget received, spent or transferred, encumbrance, and available. Again, since we're all using the exact same Munis system, it should be relatively easy to be able to do that. Because, for example, in the Board of Ed budget, they have listed Title I Improving Basic Programs as a grant source. But I go into the budget and I can't see that because it's just formatted differently.
Well, we've never gotten revenues from the Board of Ed.
Well, again, that's what the grant reports are, right? So the grant reports are basically taking the grants and explaining what line items they're going into. And the line items are teachers, certified tutors, field trips, et cetera, et cetera. It might be the original appropriation, it might be a transfer, but nonetheless, we are seeing, how the money is being spent from the grants, but not necessarily from the source of the grant. Just a request.
All right,
I will ask Christian.
I'll take a motion on the reports.
Sir?
Sorry, Mike, go ahead.
Yeah. Board of Ed, a couple things here. The reimbursable wages on page 1 of 112R that's an unbudgeted, that's an added line item, I guess, which has a year-to-date debit there of 30,000. Will that 30,000 be reimbursed?
I will ask.
I think we've asked about the non-certified substitutes before. Nancy, did you ask when they were here for?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. I'll look at that online. And the pension line. My question is, are there pension payments also supposed to be regular and paid throughout the year? Or is that some sort of lump sum at the end of the year? That's a $1.1 million item that has so far an expenditure that is $45,000.
Mike, sorry, where is that, please?
That is, that's
First
201L
page.
on page 1 of the Board of Ed report. 201L.
I see it, thank
So
you.
just want some clarity from the Board of Ed on the pension payments and if it's budgeted correctly and being paid correctly.
Okay, I will ask.
Yeah.
Well, my understanding, and I don't know how they account for it, because it does seem odd that they haven't really spent any money here, right? But, I mean, when the actuaries do the reports, what we get is a number that's a function of, it's a percentage of
Right, they're
payroll, right?
supposed to be funding the.
So you would think that when they do their payroll every 2 weeks, that they would flow through this report, right?
Right.
So maybe you could
But they
just,
do payroll through an outside company, it might just be catching up.
yeah, if you wouldn't mind asking, please.
Okay, if you see something, say something.
We've had numerous times, and it has to do with your attendance and timely
I'm
attendance
very
this meeting, but
happy.
it does
Very
not seem to
happy.
have any effect. I know you're expecting higher things from the Board of Ed, but they might expect you to show up on time.
So happy to spend time with my people before coming to the desk.
These are your people at 6:30. Any other comments on the Board of Ed? If not, I'll take a motion on the reports, please.
Motion to
Motion.
accept the reports.
All in favor? Oh, sorry. I apologize, I should ask for a second. Second, please.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Nay. Thank you. All right. We are going to move on to finalizing the fiscal year 25-26 budget. Just a quick public service announcement. Assuming we get our job done this evening, the public hearing will be held on Monday, April 7th at 7 p.m. at the North Haven High School.
And just to chime in on that exact point, Mr. Chairman, we are not technically finalizing the budget this evening. We are bringing the budget to a point where it can be presented to the public at the public hearing in order to gain the public's input, and then we will possibly, depending upon that, vote on it after the, I guess it's after the May meeting, right?
We vote on what goes to referendum at the April.
I think it's April, but yes, I think it's April.
What goes to the May referendum, sorry.
Yeah.
But I take issue with the statement that we're finalizing the budget, because I think that that diminishes the value of public input, which is critically important.
I don't think that was the intent.
I'm sure it was not the intent, that's why I'm correcting.
All right, one or two other things before we open the discussion. I think everyone in this room and everyone at home is aware that we've all had revaluations this year, which is going to make this budget challenging. Just to give you a couple numbers, just so people have an appreciation for what we collectively are facing. I have the preliminary grand list here, which is pre-BAA. Residential property went up 37.5% under the current reval. I combined the commercial and industrial, and my math says it went up about 34%, so less by about 5% than the residential. Personal property only went up about 8%, and motor vehicle actually went down close to 14%. So I give you those numbers just to give an appreciation of the fact that, unfortunately for all of us who are homeowners in town, you know, the increase in valuations were more heavily weighted on the residential side than the C&I side, the personal property and/or the motor vehicle side. And the other thing, again, just to give people in the room some baseline, I'm just going to give you the numbers that we're working with for the current budget pre this discussion. So the current budget for the town of North Haven, I'm going to round a little bit, is $63 million. This is the town side only, by the way. $63,389,000. The budget, as we have it at this exact moment, is $68,399,000, or a 7.9% increase. The Board of Ed is $64,023,000, and the budget for the upcoming year, as it is right now, is $68,496,000 for a 7% increase. Capital last year was $855,000, currently budgeted at $2,704,000. Contingency, $300,000 last year, currently budgeted at $400,000. And the grand totals of those two numbers are current budget, $128,566,000, proposed budget, $140,003,000, if you will, for an 8.9% increase. So,
Are those figures before tonight's?
no, that's just what we have, Mike, pre-declinations.
Yeah, so then I have to correct you, I'm sorry, Tim. The capital currently is $854,668.
That's what I said.
And- No, you said it was 2-point-something million.
No.
No, I said that's the budget.
It's not the budget anymore. It's the cuts. Remember, the cuts.
No, I gave the budget, I said, as we've been presented with it.
This new one we got tonight?
No, I said pre this discussion.
Oh, okay, pre-cuts.
Yeah,
Okay. Thank you.
not a problem. Okay. So I guess, working off Mike's last comment, we do have actually two lists of proposed declinations. One of the lists was from the majority members. I'm going to just give the totals here, which I think was what Mike was alluding to. But there's a total cuts on the town side are $528,658. I will go through some of the major ones there in a minute. No cuts proposed for the Board of Ed. The cuts to capital are $1,775,244,000, and there's a $100,000 cut to contingency. If you add all those up, the budget, if we were to go forward on those numbers, so after the declinations, would be $137,598,000, $938 for a 7.03% increase. I'm just going to give you some of the bigger cuts that we have on our list. The biggest one is OPEB, which is other post-employment benefits, which we reduced from $500,000 to $250,000 for a $250,000 cut. We have a reduction in the contingent fund from $400,000 to $300,000 for a $100,000 cut. There's a number of cuts to the police department. The biggest one is for police personnel full-time, $145,548. The police chief did request in his budget 2 full-time officers for next year. As it stands, that number reflects 1 officer who would not start in the budget until January 1 of next year. There was another $10,000 reduction in the EMD certification line. There's a number of cuts to the fire department, which account for about $92,000. Contractual replacement staffing, EMT, I'm sorry, that was $37,000. EMT training, $30,000. Building maintenance and repair, $10,000. Technology, $5,000, and vehicle maintenance, $5,000.
I just want to jump in. You may interpret this that we're cutting the police and fire department. We're not cutting the existing police and fire department. This is a pullback on the requests for next fiscal year for police and fire. I hope everyone understands that. There's no cuts to the existing department. This is a reduction from the request for next year. I hope everyone now understands.
Thank you, Mike. Nancy has also given us some cuts, but maybe to try and keep people on track, why don't we open up the discussion on the proposed cuts on the sheet that I just mentioned.
So do you want to address the fact that we have 2 different declination lists for 2 different amounts?
What we've done is I asked the members if they had any proposed cuts, to please send them into the finance office. The majority members proposed the cuts that you just heard. The minority members have another set of cuts, which we can go over in a minute. I just thought we might make more sense to take them one at a time, but any other comments you'd like to make, Nancy?
Well, I guess I'm just trying to understand, there's even a discrepancy between the declination list that we were sent in our packets and the booklet, and I believe the discrepancy is that the town was bumped up by just a very small amount, but then there's a $95,000 additional reduction to capital. And so I still haven't been able to pinpoint exactly what that is.
You might have to explain that to me. I'm not sure I fully followed you.
Well, if you go to, if you sum up the total amount of our declination list, it's $2,403,402.
I got 902.
Yes, and so the second sheet that we received just today, not the one that we received in our packet,
Oh.
has a total of $2,403,902. And the source of the problem is that if you subtract out the numbers that you listed off, the capital reduction of $1,775,244 from the original January budget, you get a number of 933 even. And yet in our booklet on page, page 5, if you look at capital, you will see that it's 838. That's a difference of $95,000. So
There's an
trying to track
entry,
down exactly what is the difference.
there's an entry for 95,000 for AC replacement field operation for Public
I
Works.
believe that was already in there.
Yes.
That was on the
was
original
already there.
list. But thank you for
Bob,
suggesting that.
sorry, where are you seeing that, please?
On the
On the declination list.
declination list.
Again, it doesn't have to be one. It could be a combination of different things, but there is a discrepancy here. And just so the folks at home understand, I'm only speaking for myself. I received my white packet yesterday, and I received our booklet this evening. So I have had to spend weeks now trying to figure out some mathematical way to relate the two grand list amounts as well as various scenarios of different expenditure increases, assuming the exact same source of non-tax revenue in order to calculate what we should have been able to do because we received all this information in advance. So I feel as though we're at a real disadvantage this evening, even trying to discuss this, because we have multiple sources of information and they don't all necessarily jive with one another.
So, Nancy, the number I gave, which was the $2,403,902, I believe I got from what came in our package. And then
Yes,
we have the other
that's
one here,
correct.
which also says $2,403,902.
902. So not 402, but 902. There's a difference.
No, I got 902 in both cases, that's what I'm saying.
I also have
What's that?
I also have the 2.49.
I have
All
902.
right, 528,
I have what you have.
Yeah,
58,
that's what I have.
100.
Ingrid, I did say something to Rich about the fact that, I said, where were the totals on this page? I had to do it myself.
Okay.
He said it scrolled on to the next page. Do you have the declinations on your computer?
No, my declarations didn't have a total.
Thank you.
Yes, so again, the original capital amount was bumped up by $500, but if you look at the number that is in the budget book, this 838 on page 5, that's not the difference between the original capital amount and this reduction. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. 2,708,244 minus 775, 933. Yep. So in our original, say, January budget, the original capital amount was $2,708,244. If you subtract from that, the amount that we all agree is the capital reduction of $1,775,244, you're left with $933.
Right, that's what I
So
got.
then you turn to page 8 in our budget booklet.
No, I see it.
And it says 838.
Yes, it should say 933.
I'm looking at page 38 of the, and trying to look at these and see which, maybe it's math, Ingrid, or is it,
It just might be a formula that's not pulling correctly, but I do see the difference.
are you looking at page 38? Or are you looking at the declinations?
I'm looking at it.
Yeah.
The total on page 38 says 838 as well.
You've added up the declinations.
I added up the declinations and the original, it should say 933.
So we must be missing
Let me
something.
just, I know, I'm gonna double check which one.
Because I just added up page 38, it says 838 as well.
830 or 833?
It says 838 on page 38.
Sorry,
Can I just, because a lot of people here are new, they don't, half the people don't even know what we're talking
Go
about.
ahead,
here. Let me try to
Sure
give
enough.
you an overview, okay? So what we're talking about, ladies and gentlemen, is in this budget book on 2 pages, it shows capital at $838,000. But the declination is the reductions that we're trying to apply to present, and I'll be presenting the town budget on April 7th. So there's a discrepancy between these 2 pages, which is kind of the Bible, and these declinations. I call them decrements. So in the end, if this is right, this gets adjusted before you go to the meeting on April 7th, and we present it, whatever we decide here tonight. That's a layman's way of describing this. And many times, this has happened in the past, these are all Excel formulas, so sometimes the formulas gotta get messed up a little bit. So this is why there's a pause here. We're trying to determine this versus that, and if it's that, this will be adjusted.
Say one more thing about the town, too. So, 63,391, 349. There's also a mistake in the town's. Yeah, definitely in capital, but there's also a mistake on the town side too. So 63,391, 349 minus 528, 658. 62,862. That's not. This is this. Ingrid, one other thing. If you look at the town budget that was presented back in January, the total town government budget of 63,391,349, and you subtract the number that Tim mentioned, the 528,658, the number that's in the booklet is a little different from that too. So it could be a couple of things going on here.
All right, I think we've figured it out, and here's what it is. For the members, if they wouldn't mind going to page 38 of the budget that was on the table tonight. 38, it's the capital page.
Yep.
So the original budget for the police cruisers was, the original request, sorry, was $200,000. The cut in the decrement page is $50,000. So the revised budget should be $150,000. It's showing on page 38 at $135,000. Similarly, the original light bar and siren package for the cruisers was originally requested at $160,000 because of we cut one car, that's one package. That's a $40,000 cut. The resulting number should be $120,000 instead of the $40,000. So if you add the difference in those two, it's $15,000 on the PD cruisers and $80,000 on the light bars. That's $95,000 right there.
Okey-doke.
All right. Okay. All right, so thank you for pointing that out, Nancy. We will have to eventually fix page 5. All right. So again, to try and keep things straight for ourselves and those in the audience, do the members have any questions, comments on the proposed decrements by the majority members?
So the police personnel, he asked for 2 full-time positions, and it's been changed to just 1 starting halfway through the year, correct?
Yes.
And fire was permitted to keep their 2 placeholders for new recruits.
That's a good observation, Mike, which I didn't pick up on.
It's still there in personnel, I believe. I think. I'm not sure.
I didn't think it was in the original budget.
It was, but Mike, that's a good reminder. I
Pointed
forgot
out.
about that.
No, it's blank.
What page is that, Mike, on the new budget?
42?
Yeah, well, because it's a line item, I think he did not want any expense allocated for it. He just wanted to be able to hire.
But what this line item is we're saying
Oh, it says
while people are
recruit-
still working but about to retire, we also want to be able to hire someone and send them to the academy, in which case you're spending, paying for two people for one position, one who is about to retire and one who is in training, and that would require money.
For which he'd either have to justify to this board
Okay.
that he has it, or come
All right.
before the board looking for funding. And by the way, I believe we did do this with a position in the budget last year.
Okay, yeah, it's to replace a retiree, all right.
Yes.
So not additional, but just permitted to replace prior to someone's retirement.
So using his
That would have
existing
to be
budget
additional. That's additional. Otherwise, you have
to
put it in
kind of
there.
a policy issue,
That's additional. Yeah,
but no additional money for that.
that's what
Right.
it is.
Got it. And I certainly appreciate the breakdown for the early voting in terms of the positions and the hourly pay. I'd be curious as to how they came up with the actual number of hours and so forth, but again, my suggestion about that was more just based upon the expenditure in this fiscal year, where we had a presidential election and early voting associated with that. So it seemed like that particular jump up to $111,000 seemed very, very high.
Didn't they talk about a new system? That's what I recall.
Well,
What?
are you questioning the cut, Nancy, of 17,550?
Well, again, we can get to it when we review my suggestions, but I'm just wondering how we came up with the actual reduction of 17.5.
Well, I gave you a sheet.
Yeah.
The meeting started.
Right. I understand. I guess the question is
Nancy, from what I understand, the reduction of 17 was due to a problem with the computer system that they were using, so didn't carry over right.
so
Right,
it was a
yes.
miscalculation?
It was a miscalculation, yes.
I see.
And as far as the hours, they're sticking to what's being dictated from Hartford as to when they have to be open and how many people have to be there. So they're not adding anything new, they're just following the law.
Right.
All right, I'd like to make a comment about the Board of Ed while members are still looking over this. I mentioned earlier that, at least under this particular list, not Nancy's list, there's no proposed cut to the Board of Ed. I just want to give you a couple numbers. The initial request that came in from the Board of Ed was a 14.8% increase. That was revised down, I believe, by the superintendent to 10.7%, and with some input from Mike and the finance department, it was reduced further to the 6.99%, which I referenced earlier. One thing I'll say about the Board of Ed is, let's remember that they do have their own finance committee on the board. So, they've got two cuts here before it even came to this board. Whereas in the case of the town side, the requests come in and the cuts get done at a session just like this. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, this will be true next year too. I mean, the special education costs are a concern. And so we've left the budget for the Board of Ed as is, at least on this piece of paper.
Can I comment on that, Tim?
Please.
So to Tim's point, I referenced earlier about how we meet often with Patrick, and we have the chairman, Ron Bathrick, sometimes attend, and Christian. The 6.99%, it was very important to me not to have any losses, not any cuts in the Board of Education. So Patrick came back and said, this is what it's going to take, 6.99%. Patrick, we're not going to lose anything, no teachers, not at all. Everything's going to be the way it is. Now, we wouldn't be able to add positions, but I wanted stability in the Board of Ed. He came back to 6.99. I said, we'll support it. We also met with the teachers union, because early on there was a lot of rumors that there was going to be cutbacks, and I met with the teachers union. Rich Monaco was with me. We assured the union that we'll support the 6.99% to keep everything the way it is on the Board of Ed. So Tim made some very good points earlier. Before it even got to me, there was a couple of reductions from the 14 or 15% down to 11%. And then it landed at 6.99. That's how we got there. No cutback in teachers, no cutback in middle school sports, no cuts. And Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that the 2 positions that were funded by a grant, they're in this budget.
They've been retained, yes.
They've been retained. Because the grant ran out, ladies and gentlemen. So we put the funding into the 6.99 to keep those 2 teachers in there, so everything was level. No cuts.
As well as the 2 requested additional positions, correct?
That's what he's talking about.
That's what you're talking about. So not retaining, but actually adding.
Right.
Well,
Got it.
they're-
It's different.
They're physically on the payroll. They were funded by a grant, and now they'll be moving over to paid by the town.
So new positions employed by the town. Yes, I agree.
Well,
And on the town's budget. So,
Well, they're Board of Ed positions. Yeah.
so I certainly appreciate that Mr. Frieda has been meeting with the Board of Ed Finance Group, as well as Superintendent Stirk, as well as with the teachers' unions, all very important in developing this educational budget. But I've also done a decent amount of research that I'm happy to share with any of the board members that are interested in looking at historically the superintendent's request percentage increase and then the Board of Finance approved increase year over year. And the range of the superintendent's request is anywhere from 1% to 7%, but the range that is approved has been from 1% to 5% year over year. And if you look at the other towns that are in our DRG, as well as towns that are in our surrounding area, the vast majority of them are starting off with percentages less than 6.99, and the vast majority of them will probably end at percentages much less than that. It's also worth noting that within our DRG, we actually currently have one of the highest mill rates. I'm also happy to see that the students are actually doing very well as far as performance on standardized testing, and that's despite decreases in the calculated per pupil expenditure. And just so people understand what that means, it's a number that is handed to each and every superintendent that involves both calculated figures from one fiscal year and the actual enrollment from a different year. I think it's far more useful to actually look at per capita funding of education, which involves taking the education budget and simply dividing it by the total number of people in the town. And I think if you do that, you can see some very important and interesting statistics within the DRG as well as in the surrounding areas. But there's a lot of variability, and my guess is that every single town is dealing with these exact same issues that North Haven is dealing with in terms of not only special education costs, but increasing costs of maintaining older buildings, as well as transporting students and providing the best education that we can afford. So I think that it is important to actually consider what we can actually afford in this town in the 4 different parts of the budget, not just 2, not just the town and capital, and a little reduction in contingency, bringing it back to the regular level, but also consider what this town can actually afford in terms of our education. And I say this as someone who has advocated for education in our town for decades. My children went through the school system here, so I say this with a large amount of hesitation, because I don't want to be taken the wrong way, but at the same time, I also, like everyone on this board, have a responsibility to actually serve the best interests of this community. So I think we have to consider making a cut to the Board of Education budget. Exactly how much, I think, is subject to discussion, but I think it is reasonable to even consider it. I don't think it is reasonable to not consider even making a cut. And that's my opinion.
You do know that if it came down to that, which we're not there, We have no say in that. And based on their budget presentation, they took a lot of cuts or flat funded. We're gonna use current textbooks, we're gonna use online. I think they did a really good job looking at it this year, knowing that this would be a tough year.
Absolutely. And I absolutely commend the superintendent as well as the chief operating officer and the entire Board of Education, not just those that serve on the Finance Committee. I think bringing that budget down was no easy task, so I absolutely commend them for doing so. We were also presented with a budget last year that they considered to be absolutely bare bones, and we were able to have them go back and identify some miscalculations and revisions that totaled $1.2 million. That was not our number. That was actually the superintendent's number that he came up with and revised the budget. And then after the referendum was defeated, there was an additional $950,000 that was not cut from the budget. It was shifted from the taxpayers of North Haven to the medical and dental budget, which is why I asked the question about whether they've had to dip into the medical and dental reserves in order to maintain their budget this year. So I think that there are discretionary funds and non-discretionary funds. I found it very interesting that after each of those cuts, the non-discretionary funds didn't change. So I think that we do have to consider making some changes to the Board of Education budget, just because I think that each and every department, just like each and every member of our community, feels the need to tighten their belts.
I think you got to keep in mind, Nancy, that that $950,000 you just mentioned, which is what happened.
Yep.
There's no disputing the facts. That represents about 1.5 million of last year's budget. So that's, of the 7% increase you're looking for, 1.5% was essentially embedded because of last year. Because last year, when we went back to the Board of Ed and asked them for cuts, we knew, this board and the Board of Ed knew that they were overfunded in some of the reserves. And so rather than make cuts to some critical people on the Board of Ed, they instead decided to utilize their reserves. So I hear your comments, but I think it's good to keep in mind that, their increase is 5.5%, if you will, because the $950,000 was really 1.5% of the budget last year.
Well, but keep in mind, Tim, when they went back and they made that revision of the first change, the 1.2 million, there were 4 different corrections, all mistakes that were identified. The first was that they did not report net of excess cost. And the number that they gave, by Patrick's own admission, was a very conservative number. It was $668,000. And in the end, we found out last month that they actually received $899,000. So that's a difference of $230,000 in this current fiscal year. And so I think that having an understanding of where various sources of revenue are coming from, as well as what those estimates are, is also part of this very complex process.
Well, listen, I was the one that pointed out in the first place last
Yes.
year that the presentation
Absolutely you did.
for that was different than prior. Okay?
Yes.
And they reversed it, okay? And as I said earlier, special ed's a hard thing for them to budget. And oh, by the way, although we didn't get our normal cover sheet from the Board of Ed that we typically do, because they don't like to release it until their own board sees it, they have reported year to date that they expect to have a deficit in the special education fund. So despite the increase you just mentioned, they're going to need that $192,000 I mentioned earlier to cover some of those shortages.
They're going to have a deficit in their entire budget or just in their special ed?
I can't speak for their total budget, but I believe they reported to this board recently they were running over on special ed.
Yeah, and they have the ability to transfer every single month, so, unlike the town. So, and I'm glad that we're receiving that additional money from the state. That's fantastic.
All right, are there any other comments, questions on the proposed declinations on the majority members before we look at Nancy's list?
I just have a question for Nancy. With all the reductions you've just rambled on about, are you in favor of cutting the teachers?
Lori Jean, what do you think my answer is to that?
I'd like to know what you think about that. Where do you think your reductions would come from? Mike just went over all of that, how we're going to protect the teachers we have.
Yes, again.
And the resources we have, but you
And yet
now
somehow
wanna
we
make
were
the
able to make
cuts.
reductions last year, and it had no impact on the students, the teachers, the administrators.
That was last year. We're in a whole different fiscal
I
year now.
completely agree. I completely agree. But a 6.99% increase is a very large increase relative to other towns, as well as for our own town. If you look at the historical numbers, and I'm happy to share these statistics with anyone that wants to look at them.
I'd like to see them.
Sure. This one. Okay, so I have one for Board of Ed, and then I have one for the town statistics. So the first one, and then I have them sorted by varying mechanisms, and we can take a look at it.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, any other comments again on the declination sheet? This one anyways? Nancy, do you want to discuss some of your proposed declinations? And if you wouldn't mind, as you go through the various components of town side, Board of Ed side, and capital, maybe we could start with the bigger numbers and move our way down.
Sure, happy to. I have, as I'm sure you have, resorted it by size.
I didn't, but I can eyeball it.
Sure, okay. So you've already done the very first thing, which is to reduce the contingency from 400,000 down to 300,000. Again, we've already discussed the early voting, which, again, this year, we've only spent $21,707, and we have it budgeted at $111.5 thousand. So that's why I recommended a $50,000 reduction, because this is a 305% increase. I understand that there are state mandates in terms of number of people that have to be present, but it just seems to me that that seems like a very large amount, and the expenses listed by the registrars didn't seem to be adding up to.
Well, my comment here is, I think we all questioned the increase when it came in, which is why we went back and asked the registrar to break down the numbers for us, which they did, and we have the request. And to be honest with you, I have a former registrar sitting here on this board, so I trust her judgment in looking at these numbers and telling us that she believes in their accuracy, so.
Yep.
And don't forget, I also mentioned that they found a mistake in their original proposal. And that's where 17,000 came off right away, so.
That's great. Let's see. I have under Treasurer Finance, let's see, Personnel Full-Time. This is the Director of Administration and Purchasing. It seemed like it was a $20,000 bump in salary that seemed a little bit on the high side, particularly since he also has a 2.5% bump as the Director of Community Services and as the manager of the Senior Center. So I thought that could actually, at least one of those could be reduced by about $17,636. The next was within the tax collector, and I mentioned this directly to Stacy during her workshop for the tax collector. Office supplies was requested at $7,500, and I reduced that to $2,500 because the actual expenditure on this line item last year was about $543, and thus far only about $750 has been spent on this line item. So
Let me jump into this one again, because it has to do with the election. We have another new law that was passed after last year's election, that there is no excuse for absentee balloting, and that's what Stacy explained to us. So her office is going to be inundated with a whole lot more requests for that. And the paper ballots cost money. That's what she's trying to work on right now.
But again, those costs will not necessarily be office supplies, they'll be personnel.
Well, she said they were office supplies. It was to purchase the new ballots that have to be made.
So the new ballots are going to be $5,000?
Could be.
Okay. Within the police department, the shift differential, again, this is a 226% increase in this line item that seemed like it couldn't be justified by a union contract or the new CBA. In fiscal year 23-24, we only spent $19,000 on this line item. And through the current fiscal year, through January anyway, we've only spent about $31,000. So again, this is one of those things that I'm hoping that a grant can be applied if this is in fact police officers who are working the third shift and they're, then the shift differential applies. This just seemed like a very large increase.
Well, you already repeated the comments I would have said, which is that my understanding is this contract driven and is partially a problem. He's got officers working the evening and midnights because we don't have enough dispatchers.
Right.
I think it also had to do with when they have to stay on board past their regular schedule.
The shift differential.
Yeah.
Yeah, the shift differential.
And that we can't predict. I can tell you from a personal standpoint on that, so.
So wouldn't that be covered by overtime?
Not
Overtime
necessarily
is when you're
because,
doing the same job, right, but extra hours. Shift diff
Yes.
is when you get a difference in pay to do a different job, right?
The different things, yes.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I'm just addressing the staying on for additional hours. Wouldn't that be covered by overtime, not necessarily shift differential? Even if it's a different job than you're used to doing?
If it's a different job, it will be covered by shift differential.
Okay, even if it's extra hours. Okay. The personnel, full-time dispatchers, the 17.2% increase in salary for the 8 clerk/dispatcher positions totaling $77,000, again, seems a little bit on the high side in terms of percentage increase. And I say this especially since the $80,000 budget for the part-time dispatcher is barely spent each year. So I don't exactly know how the chief is utilizing both his full-time position and his part-time position in order to compensate the dispatchers, but it seems like rather than increasing one line, just utilize what they've actually been budgeted. Okay. Moving on to the fire department, I'm recommending reducing what is traditionally an underexpended line item, which is overtime, not to be confused with contractual replacement staffing. So overtime is exactly what we were just referring to. A fireman works beyond their 24-hour shift. And I'm suggesting reducing this from $106 down to about $82,000, or a $25,000 savings. This $37,000 increase in overtime expenditure seems a little bit out of line with the history of this line. In fiscal year 23-24, only $63,000 was spent on it, and to date, only $29,000 has been spent. So $106,000 seems a little bit out of line.
Doesn't that take into account the loss of volunteers?
I don't know why it would, because it's overtime.
Well, there's been a reduction in the number of volunteers.
Right.
What-
Again, if we saw it, if there were a problem with this, we would have seen it last year, we would have seen it this year, and we're not. So I'm just simply using this historical data to project it into the next year, so.
The line, my recollection was, the increase was due to wage increases and calling in officers, off-duty firefighters, sorry. That's, well, I'm not getting to the number per se, Nancy, I'm just telling you that, but I wrote down an increase.
Yeah, no, I remember that as well. But again, we would have seen the increase this year and with the wage increase, and we also have to to some extent, utilize our historical information in projecting forward. Also within the fire department, EMT training. Again, I'm not in any way trying to reduce the amount of training that our firefighters receive. However, the 63% increase in EMT training expenditures seems a little bit out of line with 23-24, where we only spent about $45,000, and to date, we've only spent about $23,000.
Well, Nancy, if you recall, he amended this number during his presentation, and which is why, actually, if you look at the other list, the number that's proposed is actually larger than what you've got here. It's 30,000, I believe. Yeah, the reduction that we proposed, if you will, was 30, but that was really based on, the chief had two changes that he presented to us during his workshop. This was one, and the other one was EMT training.
And that's not to be confused with paying for our EMTs to go and receive additional training to become paramedics. That's a different program altogether, correct? Because that resulted in a little bit of a spike in that particular line item. But I think that is no longer the case.
By the way, I misspoke. I repeated EMT twice. His other change was contractual replacement staffing, sorry.
I think the other line that Nancy's speaking about, it's when they actually get their license. They're certified EMT, they get a stipend for that.
Okay.
No. The EMT line that you're referring to is when each year they're actually compensated for maintaining their certification. Is that the
Right.
one you're referring to?
Yes.
So that's a once a year. No, I'm actually referring to the actual EMT training. And that's very different from the contractual replacement staffing, as well as the line that you're mentioning. And again, the chief had tried to spearhead a new initiative of taking EMTs and sending them off-site for training to become paramedics. And so that, he was kind of folding into that line item, so we saw a little bit of a blip in that, but I don't think that is the case for the next fiscal year. I could be wrong. Let's see, moving on, sanitation. We have maintenance of equipment within sanitation. Again, I think a lot of our sanitation trucks are a little on the newer side. So I would reduce this just by $10,000. This, again, this is like a 16% increase. Again, in the last year, they only spent about $58,000, and currently, to date, they've only spent about $20,000.
Admittedly, it's a de minimis reduction, but
it's not a lot.
we cut their capital pretty hard, which
Right,
means their
we cut
maintenance is
all
going to
their
go up.
capital. So they're going to need more maintenance if they don't have any capital.
Right. And transfer station recycling, this was a 50% increase. That seems a little bit on the high side. It's a relatively small reduction of just $7,000. And that's all I have for the town. Any questions for me on that?
Just give me 1 second on the last one.
Is this for the transfer station? Is that what you were referring to?
Yes.
It was.
Okay,
Per
those are
permit
state
application?
mandates. We can't cut state mandates.
Right, it's the cost of obtaining the permit, my recollection,
There's
right?
all different
Oh,
applications.
And actually, I
That we
apologize.
get every year.
So it didn't apply to this year. It's only going to apply to next year, the state mandate?
No, every year we get different licenses that we have to renew.
Right. And the cost of the application?
Okay, but sorry to interrupt you, Nancy.
I didn't
The other thing is, when he presented his budget, we combined two line items into one.
Yes.
So the leaf composting was a $5,000 budgeted line, and the permit application fee was 10. So it's in the budget currently at a combined 15, and the request is for 15.
Right.
Yes, I think I had made the request that that be split out. Transfer station.
All right, before Nancy moves on, any other questions or comments on her proposed cuts for the town side? Did you want to cover the Board of Ed, Nancy, or the capital?
Again, I haven't really had the chance to do a head-to-head comparison of which of my suggestions have actually made it into the capital budget. But I will start with my Board of Ed recommendation. And I had made a recommendation to reduce it from a 6.99% increase to a 4.5%, sorry, I take that back, to a 4.66% increase. And so that would have been about a $1.49 million reduction. And again, given what we went through last year, this doesn't seem out of line. And it also seems entirely consistent with what we're seeing in other towns throughout Connecticut.
Can I make a comment? I would beg to differ.
Sure.
This year, there was specific conversation with the Board of Ed to start with like what the bare bones was. I compared it from last year's budget to what they presented. They made a lot of cuts.
Absolutely, they did.
And if you're asking for a lot of cuts more, that's going to impact the children and resources. I'm just making that, they really did come with the most cuts. Instead of going back and forth, they came in with.
I don't disagree that they made cuts. I absolutely don't disagree. But you're looking at the numbers there, and you look at the percentage increases in other towns, and you also have to look at the size of their budgets in other towns, as well as the size of the total population. Again,
Right.
it varies tremendously.
True, but North Haven has a good rating for schools. Why do you think
Yes.
people are coming into the town? And special ed is a draw, because they have a good program.
Yep.
And then I just got one more question or
Sure.
comment on the sanitation.
Yeah.
We have not, in a very long time, years, given any new sanitation, to Public Works. They've been repairing and repairing. We've seen the pictures. So I'm just making a comment on that. I disagree with that.
Are sanitation trucks, meaning
They're-
garbage pickups?
No, I'm talking about Public Works in general.
Oh, Public Works in general,
Yeah.
that's different.
Yeah.
That's different. Yeah, well, for many years, we were able to use MRSA.
Right, but we can't. So these
Well-
trucks are 74? I mean, that's my
Right, so
comment.
Public Works is a much bigger issue. I'm talking very specifically within sanitation.
Okay.
So, thank you. Moving on to capital. Again, I think the very first one was already included in the declination list, the community-assisted listening device, the police department cruisers. I had recommended reducing from 4 to 2, and it looks like we've reduced in this declination list from 4 to 3. Again, in the future, much like every other department, I would love it if we could get some sort of description from the police chief of, this is our fleet, this is, these are the newer ones, these are the older ones that we feel based on mileage and overall performance of the fleet that we think should be replaced over a certain, phased out period of time, whether it be in the 5-year capital plan or whatever the case may be. I think that would be very useful.
Well, look, I've been on the board a long time, and the various police chiefs, of which I think I've been here in front of 3, have almost routinely asked for 3 vehicles a year, sometimes 4, and we've sometimes given them 2, but, 3 has been the number. And I hear what you're saying, but I without getting into a long conversation right now, I don't want to be on this board, to be honest with you, Nancy, looking at the fleet for the police department and saying, this one's got 100,000 miles, chief, this one's got 80, why you replace it? That's his job. That's not my job.
Right. Well, I mean, we ask this information of the fire chief. We ask, describe your fleet and the age of the fleet and, how they're utilized. And
No, I
think it's only
understand
fair
that,
to
but
do that with the police
you kind of
department.
inferred that we were going to be,
And it's not like every one of those cruisers is out on the road every single day. They're alternating.
Shouldn't
So
that be a function of the Board of
Commissioners.
Board of Police Commissioners?
sure,
Yeah.
I would hope. Okay, so moving on, I believe you also reduced the police department in terms of the firearms request.
that was clear with the chief, by the way.
Yep, I would imagine. I had also recommended the reduction of the unmarked vehicle for the police department. Again, I'm not saying that they don't need it, but apparently you all felt as though it was not needed. So I was simply saying, if it's going to be an unmarked vehicle, just get a cheaper one. It doesn't have to be $50,000, but I guess you didn't agree, so it's been reduced by $50,000. In the fire department, the ambulance, I believe that was also removed. Again, I find it interesting that the ambulance that was most recently purchased using ARPA money, it was a 2020 ambulance. So it couldn't have been purchased in 2020 because we got the ARPA money after that. So they must have used the ARPA money to make a purchase of a used ambulance, and they're requesting taxpayer money in order to buy a new one at $275,000. But that was
Oh.
cut nonetheless.
That's possible, but I do recall, especially on the engines, there's a big lag time between when they order.
No,
When they get
the
delivered.
ambulances was the one thing that was an exception.
Okay.
And the chief mentioned that.
All right.
The engines, absolutely, and the ladder trucks, but the ambulances, there seems to be a pretty big supply of them
Okay.
out there. So, I think you also agreed on the removal of the UTV brush vehicle and the equipment that goes with that. Public Works, I had recommended removing the mobile radios, but I guess you decided not to do that. Is that true? Let me see. It was $45,000, but yeah, I guess you kept that in. Again, I think the question was, don't they have phones? Don't they have radios? You know, other mechanisms for communication other than mobile radios for Public Works. But I guess you left that in there. And then the last thing I believe you also included was the plow with the snow package for $252,000. So I think we were in agreement on a lot of the capital items, and you added many more things that I didn't cut. And so. Any questions on the things that I've proposed?
All right, any questions on what Nancy proposed? Any other questions or comments on any of our work here?
So I'd like to make just some general remarks if I could,
Well,
or do you
let's,
want us to break first and then come back and I'll make those comments?
well, actually, I'd like to give the other members a chance to speak if they could.
Sure, absolutely, please.
Mike, anything you'd like to say?
The library, I did have great respect for their programs and their level of service and what they wanted to do there. And there were two items on it, the kiosk that can actually take the place, I think, of some personal service help, might reduce their labor requirements, and the fact that they want to conduct some of their programming outside and do need that small stage for only $5,500. If we want to maintain or even enhance the services in this town, I thought that those were very reasonable expenses that we might reconsider.
I'll just say that I believe what I'm told is that that I think Richie talked with the librarian, that he believes that the Friends of the Library may be able to raise enough money for the kiosk, but that was not, I believe, he did not say that for the stage.
Okay.
Any other members? All
Tim,
right.
if I could just say
Yep,
one quick thing.
please go ahead.
This is not an easy task for anybody to have to do, but I think we all need to remember that we are not here to manage how somebody runs their department. We have to trust the people that have given us this information, so we're not micromanagers. And I just wanted to say that.
And I'd like to say that I support the majority declinations.
All right. I did want to comment on the expenses, which are estimated in the budget, or in the package we got tonight. I know they were only recently given to some of the members, but in total, there is a reduction in revenues. This is outside property taxes, by the way, of $1,280,000. The big numbers being fund balance for $500,000, Quinnipiac for $300,000, Nancy, the personal property audit taxes you mentioned earlier, $200,000 on building office fees, $100,000 on town clerk fees, $50,000 on building office fees, offset slightly by a $95,000 increase in telecommunications and pilot combined. So, I know Bob mentioned this to me personally. We did keep the interest on short-term investments the same. We all know the board is trending higher. We also know that it's already been reported by either Ingrid or Rich, one of them, or both of them, that we've had to reset some of the rates that we had gotten earlier in the year on some of our investments to a lower amount. And I personally was at an economic presentation by my employer 2 weeks ago where an economist spoke, and she said, at least her department is predicting a 1% increase by the Fed via 4 rate cuts this year. So I guess we can talk about that, but that was the rationale for keeping that low. And I guess I'll also say something I've said in the past, which is when we get deep into a year, and frankly this year is a good example, we can't force the revenues. There's almost no way for us to take a management action at Mike's level, for instance, and bring in additional revenue. You can cut expenses, you can hold the line expenses, you can talk to the department heads and see what they can do to help reduce the expenses, and that's truthfully what's going on right now in town. So it's been my personal preference to be reasonable on the income side, but also be conservative, because it's just a harder variable to control if you get 9 or 10 months into a year. So, anyway, any comments on the income side?
Yeah, I think that in the past, we have kind of used the fund balance transfer as kind of exactly what you're describing, kind of a pressure relief valve in which we budget for it, the taxpayers benefit from it as a source of revenue that is not taxpayer dollars, and then we have some discretion as to whether we actually transfer the funds or not. But to budget it at zero leaves us no wiggle room. It doesn't benefit the taxpayers, and then we don't have that ability to transfer unless the board makes a special, vote to appropriate funds from our general fund. So I think that last year we appropriated $500,000, and we didn't necessarily have to use it this year. And I believe that the year before that we only used a small fraction. And I think that's wise, given the variability in our various sources of non-tax revenue, which is...
I'm going to let Mike comment a little bit here, but I will say this. I mean, for a number of years, somewhat at Mike's recommendation, what the board did was we rolled over the surplus from the prior year into this line item. And also, we had conversations last year, maybe the year before, I don't remember honestly, about bringing that down, because although it is a potential source of revenue, it's also a one-time revenue, and you may or may not be able to repeat it in the ensuing year. So we had been trying in the last couple years to bring this number down, and we all know we haven't quite got the audit done yet for last year. I'm not aware that we're going to have a significant surplus. I'm not aware we're going to have a significant deficit either, by the way. But I think historically that's what we've been doing with this line item.
Yeah, so for the public who's watching here that may not understand this part of the conversation, the fund balance is the rainy day fund. And in the event that there's a catastrophe, you want money in the reserves. So we chose this year not to utilize any fund balance for this budget that we're speaking about. If we drive a deficit this year because of the fiscal year revenue not coming in, then we have to call a special appropriation to take the money out of the fund balance to balance the budget. I've already confirmed that with the attorneys. The subject came up earlier on special education. So one of the other reasons we didn't put fund balance in for this coming year, because if there's a deficit and a shortfall in the Board of Ed for special ed, that calls for a special appropriation to take money out of the fund balance to help the Board of Education. So we went conservatively on that this year and not put $500,000 or $600,000 out of the reserves, because we are anticipating a possible special appropriation out of the fund balance to help the Board of Ed on a special ed deficit. Even though $192,000 are coming in from Tim, and talking to Patrick, Christian, Ron, that it could be more than that. So we didn't want to have a double dip out of the fund balance, knowing that we have to protect special ed first and foremost, and then we'll see how that goes. But that's why there's no $500,000 or $600,000 in this upcoming budget. And by the way, if we did that, which we're not doing, if we did that, you're going to see a mill rate reduction from me on April 7th that's going to be anywhere from 5.2 to 5.4, in that range, mill rate reduction. Could be a 5.29, could be a 5.41, somewhere in that range. To take 600,000 or so out of the fund balance, knowing that we have to potentially give the Board of Ed money out of the fund balance on the special appropriation, that would reduce the proposed mill rate reduction. I'm giving you rough numbers here. It would add 0.15 mill reduction. So it's not that much. In my mind, it's more important to protect the potential liability on the special ed situation at the Board of Ed than to, knowing that could happen, then pull another 600,000 or 500,000 out before the Board of Ed even comes to us. Then we're looking at a significant reduction out of the rainy day fund here in town. That's not something I want to do, because technically that you want minimum 1 month of reserves out of an annual budget. So if look at this current budget, let's say it's $120 million, you want at least $10 million in the fund balance to at least get by for 1 month. So I'm not inclined to do double dips, 2 withdrawals out of the fund balance, knowing that we've got the situation we have to be cognizant of on special ed. Hope that explains it, ladies and gentlemen.
But Mike, just simply putting it in the budget doesn't necessarily mean you're taking it out of the general fund. It just gives us the option to do that if we are, as a town, pressed to do so.
Well,
but we don't have to make that withdrawal.
But isn't it likely we're going to need it, so we're going to have to make the withdrawal eventually?
We didn't use it this year, and we used only a fraction of it the year before. But what it does is it takes some of the pressure off of the taxpayers, right? As you mentioned, it would reduce the mill rate, but we wouldn't necessarily have to utilize that money unless we wound up in both a revenue shortfall and an over expenditure. But that really hasn't been the case. We've somehow managed to wind up with a surplus year after year.
Well, I would attribute that to good management, but
Yeah, we do this every day, folks. Myself and Rich Monaco, we manage this every single day here. I know the nuances of this government, 8 terms. I know the algorithms that happen in this government from a financial standpoint. I understand what Mrs. Barrett's saying on the surface. I understand her argument. But I've been doing this a long time. And I've just been appointed to a statewide commission to help manage the statewide pension system. Why did Governor Lamont appoint me in a bipartisan fashion? Because he thinks we know what we're doing here.
Mr. Frieda, can you add any insights about interest and liens expectations for the next fiscal year? Because we are currently at about $728,000, and we've only budgeted $600 for next year. Is it the expectation?
To that question, I think there's some one-time revenue points of generation that are not going to, they're going to be non-recurring the next year. So we've had a great deal of success on blight. Ingrid mentioned it earlier, it's non-recurring. It's the same thing on this also. So we wanted to be conservative on that because we weren't sure by adding it to what it was that we could attain that number. There's variables that happen, ladies and gentlemen, throughout the year. You never know when we're going to get a blight resolution, whether we're going to get this lien revenue that Mrs. Barrett's talking about. So, sometimes, as Tim mentioned it, we don't want to be overly aggressive on the revenue streams because we don't know if we can capture that revenue.
And do we have an idea, Ingrid, of the debt service reserves and whether there's any money there that we could utilize in this budget? I know we budgeted in the current fiscal year $75,000, but we haven't used it.
We don't have any reserves currently. We're gonna use them, I think, this year. That's it.
I thought there was a point in which we were utilizing the short-term sale of bonds and using that money to grow that particular that account. Is that my understanding?
Well, what was funding that account was the premium on bond placements.
Yes.
That's correct. But Richie told me exactly what Ingrid just said, by the way.
Right. And we looked into that, we checked that, and I was involved with that too, with Ingrid and Rich, and it's just not there.
No, because we certainly have issued a lot of bonds
Right.
recently. So I would
Right.
think that we would have that revenue stream.
We also have to pay out of the debt service fund all the fees that are incurred.
Yeah, the cost of issuance come out of that.
Of course,
Right.
I understand. So you're saying there's no wiggle room, Mike, on any of the items that are listed on page 7 in our income budget?
Well, I don't think so. There's two answers. I don't think so, and on one item, I don't know. And that is on whether or not we're going to get a bump on ECS. Because there's a lot of conversations going on at the state level. I myself have spoken to Governor Lamont on this, and he added, I think, $43 million or so to special ed, which the legislative body on both sides of the aisle doesn't think is enough. So there is a chance, and I'm hoping this is the case, we could get a bump on ECS. But beyond that, I don't really see anything unless we could potentially look at the pilot payment and see if there's any upside to this reval on the non-taxable property that the state is willing to give us increment of money for on the pilot. Pilot, ladies and gentlemen, is an acronym for payment in lieu of taxes. Hospitals and colleges all over the state, they don't pay taxes. The state gives us about 37% revenue called pilot revenue in lieu of getting no taxes at 100%. And by the way, when I first took office, that was 77%.
I was going to say, that number's come down a lot over the years.
Come down a lot.
Yeah.
So we're now down to 37%. And maybe, I'm not too optimistic about that. Could be a bump in the pilot payment from the state, but we don't know that right now. We can't put that in, and we won't know that, ladies and gentlemen, until after this referendum happens. That's another dilemma. We don't know the final figures in the state until after the cities and towns already have to pass their budgets.
Nancy, I did notice I failed to mention we bumped miscellaneous receipts to 150. I know you brought that up earlier.
Miscellaneous, because it's 0 here.
No, it's 150. It's at the bottom of page 7 here.
Oh, I'm looking at miscellaneous under Fed State, sorry. Yeah.
All right, would the members like to take a 15-minute break to caucus?
Yes, sir.
All right, so let's reconvene at 8:35. All right, I'd like to make a motion that we return from our recess.
Okay, make a motion.
Second, please.
Could I speak?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. All right. Before we begin some additional deliberations, I'd like to make a suggestion to the board members. We do have a number of people in the audience, 3 in particular, which would be our 2 selectmen, Sally Buemi and Bill, and also we have the chairman of the Board of Ed, Ron Bathrick. We do take public comment at the end of our meeting, and we will take public comment at the end of our meeting. But I'm going to suggest to the board that we do allow for this meeting only a very limited comment by those three people, if they do want to make comments, by the way, just because obviously the budget's very important for the entire town. So comments, thoughts from the members, please?
So we're just going to vote on this, Tim? Or are we going to make comments before they
Do we
speak?
have to amend the agenda?
I think it is an amendment to the agenda, Mike, yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Are you making a motion?
We can. Right now, it's just conversation, but yes, I make a motion. I'll make that motion.
I believe significant input from other officials and relevant parties would be helpful to this process, so I have no objection.
I fully support it.
Any comments from the other members?
No objection.
All right, so, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, so, if Sally Buemi, Bill Piper, or Ron Bath would like to come up, please limit your comments to 5 minutes. Sally's already warned me she needs 7, but we're gonna compromise at 6. But we're gonna let, I think we'll let, well, we need someone who's gonna set the pace here properly. So I think we'll let Mr. Bathrick go first, and then Sally can learn from Mr. Bathrick, and then,
Thank you, Sally. My name is Ron Bathrick, 37 Susan Lane, North Haven. Over the last 12 years, I've had the opportunity to chair Community Services Committee, Board of Ethics Committee, North Haven Long-Term Recovery Committee, and now the Board of Education. And I've had a wonderful time doing that. The one thing I've been able to do is talk to parents, students, religious leaders, town leaders, business leaders, numerous people about many things. And the one thing I've never said to them is, let me check and see what Wallingford is doing and I'll get back to you, because that would be insulting. What I try to do is answer questions as they are brought to me based on the situation at hand, how it works in the town, and how it helps the town. My current position now as Board of Ed is to make sure that our students have an outstanding educational opportunity, whether it is in the arts, or whether it is in sports, or whether it is in specialized education, whether it is in basic education, whatever it is that we think they need, it's our job to provide. And that's what myself and the committee strive for every month, every meeting. So one of the comments that was made is that, well, we should take the money and divide it by the population. First of all, no one does that. No one does that. So that's misleading. We do it by student. In our DERG, there are 24 schools. We are 18th in per pupil spending. 18th. We are one of 6 schools that is under 20,000 as of last year, spending per student. That means 18 schools are spending much more than 20,000 per student. If we moved up just 2 spots in the DERG last year and used the number that that school has, our budget would have been $70 million. That's the difference between 2 spots in a DERG of 24, and it's only 2 spots. Mind you, we are 18. At that, we are having tremendous strides in our educational system. We are making advancements in state placements, in test scores, and in futures for our children. The graduation rate, has been phenomenal. These kids are going on to further education, and when they are not, we are sure that they are prepared to be successful in whatever career and life choices they make outside of further education. Whether they go right into the work department, whether to become entrepreneurs, whatever it is they do. Special education, I'd like to address briefly. Okay, the town hasn't had to spend a lot of money on education, special education over the last couple of years. That's because we had a surplus in our budget for, that we all know we gave back almost $1 million last year. That is part of the monthly transfer that we would use to cover those expenses. As of this budget, we have removed all of our surplus, and we are riding with zero, which is not the best way to do it, but we knew that in order to maintain what our kids need, that's what we would have to do. It was a painful decision that we all talked about for a long time, and we finally came to the understanding that the best way to do it would be to get rid of that surplus so that we can move on with the kids' education, hope that the state would provide some money and that we wouldn't have to go back to the town and ask them for any help. So as we're discussing these things, I want the town to understand that the DIRG is a per pupil expense. It is not per citizen. It is not per citizen. Even if it was, we would be low. We would be way low. We are doing everything we can to provide everything we can. Between buses, our buses are secure, our nurses are now secure, our teachers' new contract just came through, it has been secured, our custodians are secure. All this means is that we have a well-functioning school, and I take pride in that, and I know the committee does too, because that, when somebody's looking to buy a house, they don't go to a town and say, man, where can we move where they have a lousy educational system? They don't necessarily care just about, the green and other things that are so important to a town. They know they're trying to raise their kids there. The first thing they look at is the school. And if you start to take away $1.4 million, which is up to a dozen teachers, I don't know how, number one, we'd all be able to look at ourselves and say we're doing the right thing by this town, and two, how we're doing the right thing by its existing citizens by not increasing the appeal of this town to people who want to move, businesses that want to come here. It really is all intertwined. I thank the board for their consideration of 6.99. I thank Mike, thank you very much for allowing myself, Patrick, Christian to meet with you on a constant basis, to talk about these things, to talk about these needs and the importance of momentum. I know you speak about momentum all the time in the development of the town. There's momentum happening at the school level right now, and that needs to stay rolling forward. And at 6.99, we can do it. At something at 4 point whatever, we cannot do it. It cannot be done. So I would just like to, state again, we were 18th out of 24 for the DIRG in spending, and we're on the uptick. We are using our dollars absolutely the best way we can, and you can see it in the results. So our 6.99 is to continue that and to keep our educational department strong. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bathard.
Good job.
Sally, would you like to go next?
Sally Bramey, 5 Blossom Drive. Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Your first remark tonight was about the reval, and that's appropriate because a lot of people are nervous about it. The budget book that I received from the finance office today with the Republican declinations has a mill rate of 29.43. So my comments are based on that. That might be tweaked tonight, it might be tweaked in the future, but I'm going by what is given to me, a mill rate of 29.43, which is a reduction of 5.21 mils. Mr. Frieda has said many times, and I agree with him 100%, the challenge of budgeting is to determine the difference between needs and wants and what the people could afford. So what matters to me, it's your job to set the budget. What matters to me, and I've already written a column about this, is that the people understand, because of the confusion with the reval, people understand what their taxes will be. So I took 3 examples. My house, Mr. Frieda's house, because he's talked about his house in public in the newspaper, and our old average. We used to use 210,000 as the old average appraised value. Houses went up 37.5%, so that 210 is now 287.7. My house was always below the old average. It's not even a 1,400 square foot house. It's small. With this new mill rate of 29, what did I say? 29?
29.43.
Thank you, 29.43. My taxes are going to go up from the current 5,679 to 6,371, a difference of 692. Mr. Frieda's taxes are going to go up from 10,333 to 12,092, a difference of 1,759. In the newspaper, he gave an estimate of his taxes going up by about 1,000, but it's 1,759. For the average person who used to have a house assessed at 210, which is more about halfway between me and Mike's house, that's now at 287.7, your taxes, if you had an average house, they're going up $1,193 using this mill rate. Now, we've also had 2 prior years of mill rate increases, a little less than 2 mills each. So the 3-year total increase for my taxes, if the mill rate stays at this 29.43, would be $1,337 for me. For Mike, who's a little bit more than the average, $2,900. And for the average person, your taxes will be going up $2,018. I just want people to understand their taxes before they go in to vote. That's really what matters to me. It is a very unusual year in that we have such a high percentage increase. At the Board of Selectmen workshop, which was not an executive session, so I'm free to talk about what was said there, Mr. Monaco said that the mill rate would have to go down about 9.5 mils in order for there to be no tax increase. So back on January 16th, I'm going to pretend I'm Johnny Carson. Remember he used to hold up an envelope and guess?
Guy's name was Karnak.
Right. On January 16th, I have it here witnessed by my secretary, I put in an envelope what I thought the new mill rate would be. I'll do like a new mill rate.
Richie said if you get this right, he'll pay your taxes.
And you know what? I forgot what I wrote, but this was over 2 months ago. 1/16/25 on this date, Sally predicts the new mill rate for 25-26 will be 27.71, which would still be, for my taxes, about a $400 increase. So I knew there was going to be an increase. But I just wanted to let you know that was my prediction back in January. I actually have a picture of myself holding this envelope with the same day newspaper, so you could see. But Mr. Chairman, I think you'll take my word for it. So I just want folks to understand that this mill rate of 29.43 is increasing the average household. That 210 is what we always used to use, Michael. You're shaking your head yes in agreement. So that average household with this budget is going up in this year alone $1,193. I just want folks to understand that, and that it's up to you to decide, the taxpayers, at the referendum, whether you support the budget or not. I just want people to understand. And if anyone doesn't know how to calculate their taxes, they could contact me. One more thing I'd like to say, yet again, Mr. Chairman, I am so frustrated by the inaccuracies in the budget book. 704C of our charter requires that we have these 4 columns, actual for the most recent completed year, the current year, estimated, and then the request. That is outlined in 704C of our town charter. And once again, I tell you this almost every year, Mr. Chairman, on page 4, again, of the book that I picked up this
Sally,
afternoon.
would you mind?
The,
What I heard you say was actual.
yeah, the actual
Current
is, the actual, the current year, and then the requested year.
Well, isn't that what we have? We have actual, we have the
Yeah,
current
the
year.
actual for the Board of Education on page 4
Blank.
is 57,392,789 for fiscal year 23-24. I have the Board of Ed's year-end report here from 23-24. They spent 61,327 that year. They were budgeted at 61,643. The Board of Ed has not had a budget in the $57 million range since 2021, when it was a little more than 57 million. So that's a 4 million, that's the wrong number. That's my point. And a lot of other numbers are wrong. That was the biggest mistake. That 57,392 in the actual on page 4 is wrong. And this should upset all of you members of the Board of Finance, because our town charter has established this system of the last completed fiscal year, which is 23-24. We're in 24-25, not completed, to give you guys a good historical reference for each line item. And if this one is this wrong, I'm sure other ones are wrong. As a matter of fact, in last month at the tax collectors workshop, Mrs. Barrett was questioning one of her increases, and she said, "Why are you increasing it by 5,000? It tracked last year at 500, and it's tracking this year at 500." So I'm concerned about the accuracy of some of the past historical numbers in this book, and you all should be concerned too, because don't you rely on last year's numbers and current projections in deciding what is a fair expenditure projection for this year? That's the brilliance of our charter. It looked at that as an essential reference for you guys to make appropriate decisions. And I complain, this is the 4th year in a row, Mr. Chairman, I've complained about blatant errors in these historical numbers. So I don't understand why it keeps being wrong. It paints the wrong picture for you guys who are relying on these numbers, and for the folks who pick up this book before the budget town meeting and look at it. That number is wrong, and others are wrong as well. Even the town operating budget for the current year is off. It's only off by about $18,000, but why is it off at all? The town's 24-25 government budget is $63,402,935. Why does it say $63,389,000? It's not off by a lot, but it's off. The Board of Ed is off by $4 million. And again, that is the 23-24 actual spending. I'm not talking about anything that is projected for this year. I'm not going there. I'm just saying your historical data in this book is once again wrong, and that upsets me greatly, and I hope it upsets all 7 of you as well, because you are the ones relying on this data in making your very difficult decisions. Please come to the public hearing and let the board know how you feel about this budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. And of course, obviously, that was nice of you to point this out to us and to the finance department. I mean, you're right, we do rely on this, and as you know, we started out this meeting trying to reconcile $95,000 in the capital, so your point is well taken. And the only thing I'll say before we bring Mr. Piper up is appreciate your explanation on the calculation of our future taxes. All I can tell you is obviously the 7 members of this board are going to feel the same pain as the residents, and having done my math, it's a little bit more painful than what you just said. So I will feel it acutely. Mr. Piper.
Thank you. Bill Piper, 28 Bassett Road. Good points by both Ron and Sally, and I have no doubt that, based on past years, this is my actual 16th budget that I've been involved in. 8 years on the Board of Finance, 8 years now as, in my 8th year now as second selectman. And I have no doubt when we finally do get to the April 7th meeting that the numbers will be correct based on, the good work that's done by the finance department here in Town Hall. One of the things that I often remark on, and I was just remarking on it tonight, is that we go through all these numbers, and it's very hard for anybody who's listening on North Haven Public TV to have any idea what we're talking about unless you actually have some of the detail in front of you. So that's why I think, as Sally was suggesting, Ron was suggesting, that it's very important that people come to the, to North Haven High School, to the auditorium for the April 7th meeting to actually see the numbers that we've been talking about. Based on having been involved for the 8 years on the Board of Finance, and I know Nancy was involved for many years, and Ron and everybody else on the Board of Ed. Sally, how many years did you have on the Board of Ed? I mean, on the Board of Finance?
I served 4 years on the Board of Finance.
Yeah, so I mean, and I think, everybody on the board has actually done their best, and the same with everyone in the Board of Ed, have done their best to come up with numbers that will work as best they can to provide the, quality services that I really have, believe that the town of North Haven provides. And, may not be the best numbers that we can work with, but from having listened to all the department heads, the Board of Education, and the Board of Finance and the Finance Department, I think everybody has done the best that they can with what they've had to deal with in terms of non-discretionary expenses, things that, in terms of staff and medical expenses going up, gas, oil, electricity, all the components that go into the budget, healthcare, to, on one hand, try to make sure we do the best we can with our expenses, and on the other hand, continue to provide the services that are so important to us as residents of North Haven. And that includes, fire, police, having a good school system, public works, community services, the library. These are all components of our, our quality of life here. And I think it becomes a hard decision personally because, on the other hand, as Sally has indicated, there may be some variability in the numbers where some people might pay more or less or whatever just based on where the mill rate is going to be. But again, I think the quality of your life is really the decision that you want to make. And if this budget doesn't pass, I'm not sure where the dollars necessarily will have to come from to make it pass. It really is trying to say, we're all in this together. The Board of Finance, I think, has put together numbers with the departments, and Mike Frieda leading the town, that hopefully puts numbers together as economically as possible on one end and to provide the best services on the other. And April 7th, I think, will give everybody a chance to look at those numbers prior to coming to the referendum to vote on the budget. So thank you for letting me speak, and I appreciate what the board has done tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Piper. Before we talk to the board, Sally, if you'd like to send an email to Ingrid or Rich, you said you had a couple other corrections you happen to notice.
Yes.
I'm sure they'd appreciate it. And of course, Ingrid and or Rich will fix the $95,000 discrepancy. Why don't I make a couple comments on where we are, and then obviously Nancy, Mike, or any other member of the board, if they'd like to speak, please do. I think we looked at the two sets of decrements, which, on each line item may be a little bit different, but actually there's a lot of commonality, truth be told, on the town side and on the capital side. In fact, there's very few lines where either there isn't at least some decrement from one sheet or the other, perhaps in different amounts, or where the total that's proposed is in excess of some of the numbers you had, Nancy. And that's true with capital as well. The big difference, obviously, between the two lists, by far and away, obviously, is the proposed reduction that you have for the Board of Ed. I think the five of us to your left are comfortable with the decrements as they came through from the majority side. Mike, we'd like to go along with your appeal to restore the $5,500 to the outdoor stage for the Community Services Department. Library, sorry.
We can
I
save
thought that was
that.
going to be paid for by the,
That was the
No,
kiosk.
no, the
That was
kiosk.
oh,
kiosk.
that's the kiosk.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah,
my mistake, sorry.
we can save that for April. We'll
That's
make
fine.
some small changes in April.
Okay,
We'll
fine.
Save it for them.
All right. I know we're not decisioning the revenue side right now. Without repeating what some of the members said about the fund balance, I think we're comfortable where it is for now. Again, if the residents decide otherwise, then we might have to make a different decision come later this year. And I think with respect to the some of the other items, especially interest on our short-term investments, I think we should stay where we are. We've got 2 months of visibility ahead of us, and that number could be revised come May. So I think for now, again, we don't have to decide the revenues anyways, but I think we're comfortable where they are, at least for the moment. Open it up to the floor. Anyone would like to make a comment?
Would you like to go first?
You can go first.
Okay, great. So I'd just like to make a couple of general comments as well as offer a few more data points. As Mr. Chairman mentioned, the current budget is about $128.6 million. The budget that was proposed back in January, based upon combining all of the workshop input, was about $140 million. That would have been an 8.9% increase. And based upon the decrements that were provided by my Republican colleagues, the budget now sits at about 137.5, or a 7.0% increase, or $8.9 million over the current fiscal year. As many people have mentioned, this is a very complex year with reval as well as questions about funding from both state and federal government, and of course increased costs of not only operations but also increased costs as a result of new contract negotiations. So, but I just want to make one point extremely clear to everyone listening, not only those listening here in the room but also those listening at home. A grand list growth that we've experienced this year of 28%, combined with a tax rate reduction, does not translate necessarily into a tax bill reduction in the next year. There are a lot of people that might think, oh, well, the mill rate's going down, my taxes are going down. Your tax bill will be dependent upon two variables. One is your new assessment by the assessor's office, and how that increase relates to the grand list increase. The grand list increase, as I mentioned, is 28%. If your assessed value is greater than 28%, you will probably be facing an increase in your tax bill. In addition to that, the size of the proposed budget is also a variable in determining the amount of your tax bill next year. For me personally, my husband and I and the property that we jointly own, we experienced a 34% increase in our property value, in our property assessment, I should say. So despite the proposed 15% decrease in the mill rate, getting it from its current level of 34.64 down to 29.43, despite that reduction, my taxes next year, if we continue with this mill rate of 29.43, would jump by 14%. So I did the calculation of what my taxes were this current fiscal year, and in order to keep them exactly the same dollar amount in the next fiscal year, the mill rate would have had to drop by 8.8 mils. So I don't think that that's going to be likely, but I'm just giving you that as some perspective. As Sally mentioned, this would be the third year in a row with increased tax payments or increased tax obligations at the individual level. Let's see, from 22 to 23, there was no increase, but from 23 to 24, there was a 6.3% increase. This current year, there's a 6.1% increase. And then, as I mentioned, there are a variety of different factors that are influencing people's individual tax rates for this coming year. But I think it's important for everyone to kind of keep in mind all of the different variables, and it's not just the assessed value, it is actually the value of this total combined budget. And the budget, we really have two levers to pull. One is reducing the expenditures, the other is increasing forecasted revenues. The chairman doesn't want to touch the revenues right now, and I'm fine with that, but we may have to revisit that. Historically, we have overestimated our expenditures and revenues, and we've done so on the backs of the taxpayers. And as Mr. Frieda mentioned, thankfully we've wound up with a surplus as a result of under expenditures. So even though we had revenue shortfalls, the under expenditures compensated for that. So, but again, the North Haven taxpayers still had to shoulder the burden of raising that required tax levy. And so I believe that all departments need to tighten their belts, not just the North Haven taxpayers. And the declination sheet that was provided to us was mostly from capital, just a little bit, about 0.75% from the town, and none from Board of Ed. So again, in terms of the equity of the entire budget, I think that we really need to be thinking about that and whether that is in fact what the people are requesting. And I am absolutely open to feedback from the public, and I encourage everyone to please come to the public hearing and offer your input on the budget. Thank you. Mr. Hallahan? And I would also agree with the chair that we were actually in agreement on many of our declinations. I didn't cut quite as deeply into the public works and field operations, and some might actually regard some of those cuts as actually micromanaging. But I felt as though I made some cuts and others were made there rather than in Board of Ed. So, sorry.
Thank you, Nancy.
Yep.
Would any other members like to make a comment before we finalize the numbers?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. First, I wanted to make my annual request, about a month late, for a new summary sheet for the collective bargaining groups. This is something that's been given us in the past, and I think it's very important for us to understand where we sit with the increases in labor, since labor is such a big component of our town. I'll give this to Ingrid later, but it's just an update on this sheet, Ingrid. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. Try to send it before the next meeting by email if you can. Thanks. Geez, it seems like every year's a difficult year, and it's happening again. Talk about deja vu all over again. Well, as we know, the main contributing factors the ones that I see to this budget increase on the town side is the health care and pension increase, which was $1.7 million right there. There's a big chunk. Our contribution to OPEB is good, since we didn't do that last year, and I think it's been recommended for proper financing in the public sector to do that. And we also have to deal with a $300,000 loss in Quinnipiac funding as a revenue source. Now, we didn't use it for whatever for what we wanted to use it for, but it was always sitting there as sort of like this fake placeholder, as though it was revenue we could get. So now that that's out, and we still have to balance the books, and stay away at the moment from use of the unappropriated fund balance. Because of course we got, that should be there in case, say, the budget might not pass by a vote or two. I don't know. But whatever might happen, that's a nice relief valve. But our long-term goal is to grow that fund, to grow the fund balance, and I'll do whatever we can to support it, support that long-term goal. So we're faced with all that on the town side, and meanwhile, on the education side, in addition to the contractual increases that they face with their labor unions, they have had the unfortunate blessing of accepting the many special ed students that have been placed out of district. And I'm glad that we have a reputation that we serve all our students well. But by this happening, by this circumstance, they are in what the Irish might call a sticky wicket. They're in a little bit of a hole here, and that's happening in the current fiscal year. So they're already about $1 million behind in that line item, and it's going to get worse before the year ends. Now they can find a fair portion of that money possibly from other accounts and other line items, but this may be a hole that they can't dig out of, and something that, again, we have to acknowledge with the upcoming budget. At the same time, just to take care of some other issues, they were asked and did use some of their reserves for medical, and they wiped out their reserves for special ed. So they have been doing whatever they can to keep the boat afloat. And so, you know, in past years, I have never wanted to support anything over a 4%, because I just think that you don't want shock for the taxpayer, and controlled growth is what is expected in the land where labor union contracts go up at least 2.5% per year, and we are labor intense. So if they had asked for an increase for next year from a budget that fully funded them in the correct way this year, they would have started out at a higher point, and their actual increase would have ended up closer to 3.5%. But because they're in this hole, starting out at a low point, the increase is almost 7%. And as absurd as it is, I understand their predicament, and I think that it's worthy of this budget in this way going to debate and discussion on April 7th and beyond. So that's how I see the overall environment here. And as for the declinations, I give an extreme amount of respect to the reductions that were the ones that were presented by the majority. They're really based on recommendations from the Finance Department. But in many cases, I'm happy that they are exploring and have indicated there are alternative sources of funding for some items, especially in capital. And there are other capital items that can be either postponed or otherwise compensated for. You know that there's many cuts that we would find it hard to propose. I mean, I wouldn't have wanted to cut the firearms replacement purchase for the police. But again, it has been said that there is a way to acquire at least half those firearms elsewhere. So because of the fine work by many people within our town and by the Board of Ed and others, I am at the moment going to support the motions tonight. But I do reserve the right, as anyone would, to reconsider and I may not support it in the future. But let's talk about this more, and let's move on to the April meeting.
Thank you, Mike, for your comments. Any final comments by the members before we move on to some resolutions? No. All right.
I have one question for you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Back when we received the grand list from Gary, the assessor, the document actually says 2024 grand list preliminary values not for official mill rate calculation.
Well, we're not doing that now anyways.
But you're using the numbers here in order to...
Well, only in that these
No, we're not.
last four, because these tax credits are based on the prior assessment year. They're not, and the changes aren't going to be extremely great, but they will alter based on the new assessments.
and the appeals.
Well, it says pre-BAA at the top. I mentioned that earlier.
Pre-BAA.
Right.
But
So-
again, we're not saying the mill rate anyways right now.
So it's
We'll
not
do
all
that.
this, it's just
May.
this section here, and these numbers are not huge.
But you will have to still use these numbers.
No, we don't.
You're not going to propose a mill rate based upon these numbers?
No, we're not. That's not what we do at this meeting. That gets done in May.
May.
I'm not saying set it. I'm saying you're not going to propose in your budget, which we already have, a mill rate.
There's been mill rates mentioned by both Sally Buemi and Mike, okay, which are in the draft budget, if you will. But our role this evening is to set the expenditure side, the spending side of the budget, okay? The final mill rate will be voted on and approved at the May meeting.
The expenditures that we will vote on tonight will be presented with the revenue in this budget book and presented to the public at the public hearing, correct?
Every year we use this sheet until it gets approved by the BA.
My concern is in a reval year. That's my main concern. So,
Well,
okay.
all right.
My concern is that it will change between now and when we have to ultimately set it.
All right, I'd like to offer a resolution, please. Resolve that the Board of Finance recommends to the public hearing a fiscal year 25-26 town government budget of $69,103,218. I'd like a second, please.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed?
Opposed?
Resolve that the Board of Finance recommends to the public hearing a fiscal year 25-26 Board of Education budget of $68,495,858. Second, please.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Opposed?
Resolved that a fiscal year 25-26 budget recommendation of $137,599,076 be presented to the public hearing to be held on Monday, April 7th, 2025, with the Board of Education to be presented first, beginning at 7 p.m., followed by the town government budget to begin no later than 8 p.m., with a general discussion to follow as may be warranted. Second, please.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Opposed?
Thank you. We still have some work to do. I appreciate all the members' efforts so far, and of course, the efforts of both Ingrid, Rich, Mike, and our department heads. And I know it's late. We've had a lot of people waiting patiently. Be more than happy to take any public comments.
Sure.
Jenny Caldwell, 69 Kimberly Circle. I wanted to start out with some questions because I'm a little confused about the fire department and the request that the chief made in terms of increase in personnel. Is there an increase in number of firefighters in this budget? Because the declinations said they were like 92,000, and that would mean that the additional firefighters were in there, but that didn't sound like that from the conversation.
There's no firefighters in the budget. There is a placeholder at $0 value for the 2 individuals that he's anticipating retiring. And while, of course, we normally replace retirees across the entire town government and Board of Ed all the time, I believe what that is for is he's hoping that he could hire a new firefighter to go to the academy, and there'll be some overlap prior to the people retiring, so that when the individual's retired, he would then have a full firefighter ready to go. Now, that's at $0, which I think we have done before for the different department. He's going to have to come. He's going to have to come before this board to get that funded, if that makes the final cut.
So I just want to be clear. So the full request that the chief made for personnel was actually declined.
It was never in the budget.
It was not in the budget anyways.
He presented it during his budget
But
presentation.
he talked
didn't
about it.
include it in the budget.
Right, he talked about it.
Yeah.
So that is, I just want to be clear as a resident that we are not getting any new firefighters again this year. And although our fire department last year had 62 incidents without a fire department response, that we're going to continue to understaff the fire department so that a resident can call 911 and they may not get a response from the fire department. It's happening on a consistent basis. As a resident, and I've come before this board multiple times and asked you guys, let's be creative about our budgeting and stop just looking at how it's always been done before. And as a resident who, if I call 911 and there's not a response because there are not personnel to be able to respond, I have a big problem with that. And we talked last month about, leaf pickup and maybe being creative about that. And the response was, I have no problem paying for leaf pickup for my neighbors, even if I don't use it. I have a problem paying for a lot of different services for other residents that other residents are using when we don't have the basic safety, public safety in our town. To me, that is problematic. And I know you guys have put a lot of work into what you're doing, but this year after year after year, we have been not, you guys have not given the chief the personnel. This is now the 3rd year that we are not adding any firefighters. And to me, it's a big problem. I want to know that when I pick up the phone, call 911, and say there's a fire in my house, that there is fire department personnel to get to my house. Because I've been in that situation where my house has been on fire. And if the firefighters didn't show up, I'd be dead right now. And I think it's disgusting that this board is willing to take that risk with the residents in this town. And there are other ways to be able to fund things. And let's look at public safety. I mean, the Public Works Department. For many years, we had one department head. Now it's 2 different departments. Maybe you need to be looking at that. So I just think that there needs to be some creativity with budgeting so that we can stop underfunding our fire department. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Amanda Gabriel. I have 1,241 square feet on 18 Renee Lane. Thank you very much for this discussion. I want to thank you, Mr. Chair, for your thoughtful consideration, and thank you to the members of the board who voted in favor to advance this. Because we are a town meeting form of government, I feel like it's really important before our voters and our residents cast their votes that they have accurate information. So I just want to correct a few small things that may have been stated inaccurately tonight. I'll be quick, 3 minutes. 1, the average requested increase for boards of education within our district reference group is 6%. Taking us down to 4% would once again put us significantly below the average. So thank you for not doing that. Number 2 is last year's average for boards of ed within our district reference group was 5.7%. North Haven Board of Ed got 3.9%. 2 years ago, the district reference group average was 4.7%. We got 2.5%. And 3 years ago, it was 4%. The North Haven Board of Education got 2.9%. And because of our teachers and our admins and our kids and the support from our first selectmen, we made it work. We made it work, and we're doing great things right now. I'm very proud of the work that's happening. So when you say that you want to consider cuts to the Board of Education, you are talking about teachers. And that's something that I take extreme exception with. Things have changed a lot over the past 5 years. We've had a pandemic, we've had a lot of political stuff happening, and our teachers continue to show up. Our teachers show up every day through unfunded mandates, through budget freezes like we're in right now. They're constantly figuring out a way to light the middle school play that opens tomorrow, Go See Seussical, without proper lighting. We have 5 of our lights that are out on that stage, and we're gonna make it work because we're in a budget freeze and because we wanna make it work. In my opinion, our kids deserve a good education. In my opinion, our teachers deserve our respect. In my opinion, our Board of Education members who are qualified to make recommendations also deserve our respect. You can't hold all the tickets while the BOE owns all the fines. Cutting us once again to 1.34 would put us below the district reference group average again, and it would be devastating for our students and for our teachers for years to come. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Amanda. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Christy Gill, 108 Grove Road. I also just want to thank everybody who is in support of the budget and keeping the Board of Education budget intact. I can cross the district reference group off my list. I think that Amanda and Ron did a good job in terms of, and said it way better than I could, and had good numbers and statistics in terms of our reference group and how it's reflected, because we do fall in the medium, and what we're asking for is not a big ask when you look at the towns around us. I'm really disheartened, and I'm really disheartened and angry, and in terms of when, you know, I'm an educator, I'm a speech pathologist in the public schools. I have kids who receive 504 in special education. It's my life, it's my passion. In addition, you know, I straddle the fence with home life and parenting. And when I hear things like we're gonna operate, which I've heard multiple times, on a bare bones budget, I think of myself as wanting to move to this town, being a parent in a town, previously working in North Haven Public Schools, working in a bordering town. And I don't want to work there. I don't want to live there. I don't want to send my kids there. And even equating that to something in your own life about what's bare bones and what you want to work on and survive on. So I don't want to see myself working or sending my kids to a bare bones district. And someone pointed out that you also have already been through 2 cuts before you've been here with the budget. It was also said that it's an unfortunate blessing that we're accepting students that have already gone to out-of-district placements. Any kid that lives in this town belongs in this district and deserves to be educated in this district. And I think it is also means that more money has to be put in if these kids are coming back, because if we just spend $80,000 in transportation, and my numbers are probably going to be wrong, so don't quote me, $80,000 in transportation, $90,000 in tuition, because we couldn't educate them appropriately and we needed to outplace them, then that means some money has to come back in terms of, do we have a curriculum, do we have staff and training that can adequately support their needs. So if anything, if we're bringing more kids back to the district, no, we're not spending the $160,000 or whatever it is per student to come back, but we are trying to say that we need a program that has integrity to support them. And it sounds like that's what they're trying to do at Clintonville School. I haven't seen the program, but that's what we're needing to do. RBTs cost money. It sounds like we're trying to save money by getting our own BCBAs and programs in a cost-effective way instead of doing that. So I've been to the Board of Education meetings, I'm listening to things, and they're trying to do it in a cost-effective way and save money because these professionals are very expensive. I know from working in the system, and I know the expenditures that Ron and the board are trying to do. So they are cutting and they are saving. And you know what? Teachers already get money cut, because ask any teacher what percentage of their salary they spend to give kids things that aren't provided in their classrooms, including, I can tell you how many emails I got this week where people were just asking for crayons for their classroom because they're already out of crayons for their classroom and they need things. They spend a lot of money from the salaries that they already make. And again, compared to our DIRG and different things, our superintendent makes less than other people in our DIRGs, different people. So I think we've already felt some of the cuts and things we have. And the last thing I want to say is we talk so much about special education, and it's important. I believe in it. It's what I do. My kids access services in the North Haven Public Schools. Gen Ed students are in crisis right now. I can tell you as a related service provider how many evaluations I've done, how many kids have not been eligible for services but yet present with big behavioral concerns. Gen Ed teachers are struggling. Support services are needed for our Gen Ed students, sometimes even more than our special education students. So our younger teachers, teachers of our younger grades, kindergarten, I'm sure you hear the need for social workers. So I think everybody talks about the research that they do for the budget and things. Some of the research is to go into these classrooms, see what teachers are facing, see kids eloping in the hallway, trying to leave the building. Some of these younger kids are not ready for school. They're not ready to come into the classrooms. There are major behavior challenges. Some people blame it on the pandemic. I don't know what to blame it on. We're years past it. But our younger students are struggling, and it's getting harder to teach and for kids to sustain attention. I really hope people watching and everyone considers, if we come back to the table, to really keep this budget intact. Your teachers are struggling. They're leaving. It's hard to maintain. These budget increases really mean something when they're asking for it, and they've done a really great job with the budget to try to continue to support that. So I thank everybody that supported the budget, and I hope maybe one thing I said meant anything in terms of how hard it is to be in schools right now as a parent, as a teacher, whether it's gen ed or special ed. Everyone is working really hard with very little. And the board and everyone is working really hard to try to give everything to kids, and things are still lacking. So as far as bare bones, there are lots of bare bone things already happening. So when people are asking for increases and still already cutting all the things that the Board of Ed did, I believe that good work has already been done before they brought it to you.
Great, thanks so much for your comments. Mary wants to come on up. We'll get you next, sir.
Please.
Yeah.
Excuse me, Mary White Summerlane. I have a question and some comments. The assisted listening device, is that out or in?
Was that in the library?
That's library. Yep.
What do we
That was
do with
removed, but in the declination list.
Yeah, it was on the list. It's out.
I'm being told it's out. Oh, yeah.
So,
Yes.
correct me if I'm wrong, that's for people who are deaf or hard of hearing? And don't we have a responsibility under the ADA of providing equipment or devices for people who are handicapped in that way?
I think it's very specific to the community room within the library, so it's not the library as a whole, it's just within the community room. And so I think it would be a shared device in order to somehow take advantage of either the acoustics of that room or to enhance the sound without altering the sound that is picked up by NHTV.
Okay, so are there other devices that are in existence for people who have, are deaf or need a listening device? You're saying it's there, it's just not going to be for the community room? Is that correct?
No, it's not, it was an ad. They're
It
asking
was an
for
ad
it.
very
They're
specifically
asking for it.
Okay, so they're adding. So you're saying, or
But it's not.
tell me if I understand. So there's no assisted listening devices for people who would need to use them in the library? Yes
I
or
personally
no?
don't know the answer to that.
She was talking about the community room, but it's best you ask her
Yeah, I
specifically.
would ask the library.
Okay, 'cause I mean, I think that's important for people who may need that in the library. And so that's my question. So I wanted to make a few comments relative to no new firefighters in the budget. I agree with what Jenny Caldwell had to say. Excuse me. We've heard about 2 simultaneous calls for service, but what people may not realize is that there are triple simultaneous 911 calls for service. Triple. There were 62 incidents where people called 911 and there was no response. We need to fund personnel for the fire department. How many 911 calls, simultaneous calls, will not be answered in the future? Will it be you? Will it be your 911 call for help that is not answered? Is that acceptable? 3 years without funding firefighters is unacceptable. You're not even funding 1 firefighter a year. Clearly that's not enough, but it's not 0. We must prioritize public safety relative to funding firefighters for the fire department, or there could be deadly results.
Thank you, Mary. Sir, did you want, just one second. This gentleman was next, right?
Oh, it's okay.
Come on up. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hi, Michelle Guglielmo, Curtis Court, and I'll try to be brief. I know that everybody's very tired and it's a late night. I also wanted to, well, for the fire department, I was also under the impression that the fire department was asking for at least 2 new firefighters in their budget. Maybe 4, I thought that's what it was too. So when everything was read tonight, I was a little bit confused about whether or not our new budget will include them having 2 new firefighters or 4 new firefighters or whatever it was. We've heard a lot from the fire chief, and that was my own impression. And if they are looking for more firefighters, I would be in support of at least adding 2. You know, I mean, we've heard from a lot of different people about our services and how they need more firefighters, so I would be in support of that.
So Michelle, just for future reference and for those who are here or at home, there is an employment table in the back of the budget. If you were to look there, what the department heads generally do is they will actually show you the number of, say, career firefighters currently, and then if there's an increase, they'll show parenthetically, you know, say 40 to 42, just to give you an example, right?
Yep.
And it's not uncommon for the department heads to voice a request in our workshops that's different than what's in their budget.
Yeah, and I did hear you say that it wasn't in their budget, so if it wasn't in their budget, then I assume they went through and it wasn't something that they felt they needed. It was just different than what I had heard from presentations that had been given around town, so that's why I was a little bit confused. I also did want to speak very quickly. I know people have brought up the DIRG, the Board of Ed DIRGs, and I have heard a couple times referencing how other DIRGs are requesting much less than what we are requesting. And I have done a lot of research. I've watched every presentation of all 24 schools in our DIRG. And there are 12 of those 24 districts that are requesting over 6%. There are only 3 of those 24 districts that are at 4.66% or less in their request. I didn't even take into consideration, Tim, when you said, if we look at the $950,000 that we took out from last year, which would account for 1.5%, that would bring our request down to approximately 5.5%, which then makes 15 of the remaining 23 DIRGs asking for more than what we're asking for. So I'll echo what everyone else said. and if anyone has questions about, the numbers and what everybody's requesting, I have all of that here. One of the one of the districts that we often get compared to happens to be next door in Wallingford, which is where I teach. And I know that when people just look at the numbers and say, oh, well, Wallingford's only requesting a 3.86, and I agree with you, Mr. Bathrick, that, it's not necessarily that we should be comparing to these other districts, right? Like, being equal is not being equitable. Like, we give what we need to give. Like, we're going to support what we need to support based on our needs. But just so you know, that 3.86 next door does not include their capital of $3.9 million. So if you include that into that request, it's now a 7.1% increase. That also includes them cutting 8.5 full-time teachers, 2 paras, and an assistant superintendent position that's been changed. So it's really hard to compare like apples to apples when you look at those numbers, unless you've gone and listened to all of those presentations and know what it's actually accounting for. So I want to just thank you all for giving the Board of Ed your support and supporting our teachers, because no one wants to lose any teachers like some of our neighboring districts do every single year. So thank you.
Thanks, Michelle.
If I could just address some of the points that were made here. There was a question about the personnel increase for the fire department. And yes, the chief did ask for 4 full-time career firefighters at a total of $506,000, but that number was not actually included in the budget. And as far as the other statistic that was cited, I believe the chief presented 64 incidents during 2024, and it's kind of a catch-all category. It's not just incidents in which no fire department unit responded. It also includes delays or, according to their standards, inadequate number of apparatus personnel responded. So, but again, we take this very, very seriously. 64 too many to this board. However, in the grand scheme of things, 64 incidents out of over 5,000 calls each and every year is just about 1%. So I also agree with Jenny. I think that a lot of these types of issues can be addressed with policy changes. I'm not trying to tell the chief how to do his job, but I also know from many of the things that he has talked about that many of these incidents in which there is not an available unit to respond is because we have our highly trained career firefighters in very expensive engines and ladders that are stuck at scenes and cannot leave until the scene is cleared. So if we could come up with creative ways, whether it's through fire and police or other mechanisms, in order to free up our firefighters, I think that number would go down. Thank you.
Sir, you've been waiting patiently. Why don't you come on up?
Yeah, thank you. No problem. Hi, David Cohen, 55 Tokenique. Thank you very much, everyone, for all of your service. It's remarkable what you do. Really very, very grateful for all the time you put into this. Just quickly on the fire stuff, I certainly can echo the strain that the department is under. I'm a volunteer firefighter here in town. There are very few of us left. One of the creative solutions could be all of us in this room becoming volunteers. So I encourage everyone here to go ahead and sign up.
My nights are currently
You're all
full right
able-bodied.
here, thank you.
Yes. But yes, no, it's certainly very, very true under great strain. Volunteers it's a diminishing number of people who have signed up over the last number of years and want to do this kind of work. So I certainly echo having more folks join the force and having more opportunities for new people, new career people to come into the units. What I did want to speak about, though, is 2 things, just real fast. I'm thinking about, I wholeheartedly support this budget, and I'm thinking about how, Michael, you're going to sell this thing. And what I'm thinking about is one thing that gets lost in the reval. Sally spoke to the tax increase. But one thing that does get lost, and you can't pay your taxes with words, but your homes are worth more. And that means something in town, right? We have valuable homes now that have gone up, I guess, 37% on average. And having valuable property in a town actually has good outcomes for people in town. and for services in town, and for people wanting to come here and buy here because their property values are higher, right? And so with higher property value, of course, comes greater tax responsibility and greater tax liability for our citizens. And I don't mean to be flip here, but there is value in that for our town and for the residents of our town. And I think one of the other things that gets lost here with the school issues that have come up today, we are a district that supports our special education students in a really material way, and that kind of compassion is something that makes me incredibly proud to be a resident here in North Haven. And I love the fact that we have a desirable district for kids who need more attention. And that makes me not only a very proud parent, I have 2 kids in the middle school here, but also a really proud resident of North Haven. And I think one of the other things that we are battling, and Michael, you are very familiar with this because you were instrumental in a recent letter that was sent to the governor and to the legislature, we are battling against a pupil spend, a per pupil spend. That's tough to say very fast, especially because it's almost 10 o'clock. We're battling against a spend that has not gone up in 10 years. Is that correct? From the state? So I think it's about $11,000 and change that each student gets now across the state on average, and that hasn't gone up in 10 years. So we are forced to make up the difference. Municipalities are forced to make up that difference. And so, Michael, you were instrumental in getting all of the local mayors and select people around the state to participate in a campaign to raise awareness of how much money municipalities actually have to come up with in response to a pretty low number from the state. And so I think we do a remarkable job as a district educating our kids. We do a lot more with less. And the suggestion that we should be cutting from our kids' budgets, frankly, makes me pretty angry. I go to the school for lots of events, and I will be there tomorrow night and Friday and Saturday because my kid is in the play, and they do an incredible job. And we do that job being 18 out of 24 in our DIRG, right? And that's pretty remarkable. So I think that we should get out there and make sure that our residents understand what we are faced with from a municipality perspective and how much money we get from the state and how much we have to make up and what it means to have a reval. It means more taxes, yes, but it also means that there is more value in our property, and there is value in that by itself. That's meaningful to our town. People want to move here because of that. That makes a difference to people. And yes, you can't pay your taxes with words, but at some point you will sell that property, and it's going to be worth more, and you're going to get more money for it. And that makes a difference to people. And I think when we try to sell this budget to our residents, and we should all be out there selling it and voting yes and making sure all of our friends and family members come and vote yes, that when we do sell this thing, we have to remind people that this is a fabulous town, and we do an amazing job with our kids, with our public service, with our safety, with our police, with our fire, and we do more with less. And I think that's really important to remember. So thank you very much, and vote yes on any time you get a chance to do this. Go out and tell everybody that we're doing an amazing job, so thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for your comments.
Good job. Peter Criscola, 54 Fieldstone Court. You guys did a great job. And I just want to say a couple of things quickly. On the Board of Ed side, we can't cut any money. I don't have any children in school, but my grandchildren did go here. It's a super school system. We have super teachers. We cannot cut it. And I don't want to pick anyone out of the board right now, but anyone that had a child in school in the past, did they ever get up and say, cut the Board of Ed's funding? I don't think so. But now that the children are out of school, we want to start cutting. Now let me get to the fire department, okay? I don't want to raise the boogeyman that we had 62 uncalled or unattended calls, I should say, okay? And like Ms. Barrett said, that's 1%, and that's still 1% too many. But in reality, I have been a supporter to hire more firefighters for the last 30 years. When I came on, we had 27 firefighters, and I fought to get 28 just to have equal shifts, so they wouldn't have to stay on 5 tricks, which meant they couldn't go home. They didn't know they were going to stay, but they were not allowed to go home for 3 days. They had to sit there for 3 full days, 24 hours, okay? So I know what it's like for these poor guys and women now that we have on there. And the chief is doing a good job, and our firefighters are doing the best job. But unfortunately, even if you put on 2 firefighters, it's not enough. If you put on 3 firefighters, it's not enough. That does not send any more apparatus out to the scene. Okay? It just doesn't work. If you were to put on 2 firefighters today, and they were to shut down the emergency unit, our rescue unit, and add an additional engine up at either the Ridge or up in Northeast, that would give you 1 more piece of apparatus on the road, which we'd have to use that for so-called ambulance engine. That's what that would be. You'd have to put on 4 more lieutenants for a different shift, which I asked for, and our first selectman was the only one in the room, the smartest man in the room, who said put them on after they passed the test. And they all should have been promoted, but they only promoted 1. They should have promoted all 5, so they would have had 4 lieutenants, boots on the ground. They would have had a year under their belt to know about management. But now we don't have that, okay? And we should have put on 4. That would have gave us another shift. So putting on 1 firefighter, 2 firefighters, is not going to give us additional coverage on the scene, because they will still be going. That'll give us 4 complete shifts, A, B, C, and D. Now we have only 2. We have 42, I believe. We need 44 to have 11 on each shift. That's still not going to send out another piece of apparatus. You're just going to put another personnel on an engine. So it's not going to cover the 62 calls. You need to put on at least, if you want to do it right, and I know the budget's going to kill you, and it's not $150,000 a firefighter, it's more like 175 to 180 with pension and with the gear and the schooling and everything else. You need to put on a minimum of 8 more firefighters. Could we afford that? Probably not right now. But that's what we're looking at. So putting up the boogeyman and scaring people, it's not the chief's fault, it's not the department's fault, it's not the first selectman's fault. It's just a sign of the times. I don't think that we have the funding right now to do it properly. But we could put on 1 man or 1 firefighter per year. Will that help? What is it? It's a drop in the ocean, because it's not going to increase the service. It's not going to give you an extra piece of equipment on the road. And if you put on 4 more, you're going to buy another new piece of equipment. And in today's value, a new engine is approximately $1 million. And to replace a ladder, you're probably looking at 1.75, maybe $2 million, and a 2-year delay. So you guys are doing a great job, and that's where I think it should be. And I don't have any notes. That's just from the cuff. Mike,
Thank you, Peter. Anyone else like to speak? All right, I know it's late. Thank you for everyone for attending. Thank you to our board members. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion.
I heard a first, a second. All in favor?
Aye.
You need a 3rd?
No.
The preceding program is brought to you in part through a grant from the town of North Haven. Watch town meetings or other videos on demand at nhtv.com.